So to start, my family history is very tragic. My parents got into a serious car accident when I was a little kid, and my dad passed away in the hospital from his injuries. My mom had lasting injuries that still affect her, making it difficult for her to walk. My dad left us the house that my mom and I continued to live in for many years to come. Eventually, my mom started seeing someone when I was around 10, so she'd be out of the house quite often. My uncle Steve would often stay at the house for days at a time while she was gone, and I got really close with him. He was my babysitter of sorts for a long time. He was always a cool uncle. He'd play catch with me in the yard, he'd take care of our pets, he'd take me to the movies, stuff like that any kid needs. Memories I didn't get to form with my dad, unfortunately. As the years went on and I got older, my mom got married to her second husband, and my uncle Steve would come around less and less. By the time I was 16, there was a period where he just didn't come over for months and I didn't hear from him. My mom was comfortable leaving me home alone at this point, so I didn't question it too much, and having the house to myself was always nice as a teenager. My mom would be home a couple nights a week for dinner, but for the most part, she lived with her husband. My mom was always very vague about what happened to my Uncle Steve. I had my suspicions that he was sick or dead, though. It may sound weird that my mom would hide something like that from me, but if you met my mom, you'd get it instantly. Because of what she went through, I think it made her a much more compassionate person that doesn't want to cause any kind of stress or grief toward another person. By the time I turned 18, I was a legal adult and the house was basically mine. My mom would visit occasionally, but she and her husband had already gotten another house together. As an 18-year-old guy having a house to myself, you can imagine that I wasn't complaining. Yes, I'd have friends over for late nights, yes, I'd have girls over, and yes, I'd often not pick things up off the floor for days at a time. I would miss my Uncle Steve though, as he was the father figure that I grew up with, and there were times where being in a big empty house by myself at such a young age was kind of lonely and depressing. I would numb this feeling often by, I guess, doing the things I just mentioned, having girls over and late nights with friends. I still had my dog Jojo, the only other life in the house really. He was an Australian shepherd, and at the time of this story, he was 13 years old. He was an old man. He always slept by my side in bed, but one night in January, I remember this because the Christmas tree was still up, I woke up and Jojo wasn't in bed. I got up thinking he was downstairs somewhere and he had to go to the bathroom. I called his name as I walked down the stairs. I didn't hear him, so I walked to the kitchen where the basement stairs and back door were, and I saw him in the dark. He was staring intently down the basement stairs. I usually left that door open because it was a bitch to close. He only moved when he turned his head to look at me for a second, but then he looked right back down the stairs. I stepped to the edge of the stairs and then looked at Jojo and said, "What is it, boy?" His tail started wagging just a bit for a second, then went stiff again. I flicked on the light in the basement and looked down the stairs. Jojo inched closer but didn't bark. I felt a cold shiver run down me as I looked down into the basement. Of all places for your dog to stare down like this, the basement is the worst place. I turned off the light and grabbed Jojo by the collar to bring him upstairs. I shut the door so he couldn't leave again. Was I creeped out? Yes, a little. It was unusual behavior for him. I was mainly asking myself what he could have heard. I tried to go back to sleep. At this point, my mind was kind of racing though, and it didn't help that every few minutes or so, I would hear and feel the vibration on the bed as Jojo would look up at the doorway, as if still hearing something from downstairs. I decided I would investigate. I wasn't going to be a mama's boy and text my mom at whatever off hour in the night it was telling her I'm scared. Part of not having a father figure in the house when you're young is becoming a man early on. I went downstairs again, and by the time I was at the bottom, I heard Jojo walking down following me. Jojo then caught up to me and went straight for the basement door again, and he stopped in the same position as last time. I stopped alongside him and looked down the stairs to the darkness again. I can't believe I did this, but I called down the stairs, saying, "Is someone there?" I flicked on the light when there was no response. I started walking down the steps, each one creaking beneath me. I hated those old steps. You couldn't see into the basement until you were about halfway down the stairs, as the ceiling was low. I was on maybe the third step when I heard the voice. It was my uncle's voice. I knew it right away, all these years later. It was my uncle's voice from somewhere in the basement, saying my name, only it sounded weak, like he was injured. I ran down to the basement as my heart dropped out of me. I got to the bottom, and it was just an empty basement. "Uncle Steve?" I called out. Jojo was still at the top of the stairs looking down at me. He didn't want to come down. I walked further into the basement, and there was nobody there. My heart was beating 100 beats per minute at this moment. I peeked behind the couch, and even behind the TV. There was nowhere else for anyone to be besides the laundry room, which was in the corner. I took one look into the corner, and I thought I heard the slightest sound on the other side of the door. That's when something just came over my entire body, where I had to sprint upstairs like a little kid and get out of there. When I got to the top step, I didn't even shut the light. I struggled to just close the basement door and then run upstairs. Poor old Jojo barked the first barks I'd heard from him in months. He followed behind as fast as he could as I went upstairs. First thing I did was lock us in my room. Then I called my mom over and over until she picked up. When she did, I was whisper screaming into the phone, telling her someone's down in the basement, and it sounded just like Uncle Steve. In fact, I knew it was Uncle Steve. I told her that Jojo was at the basement door when I woke up, after he obviously heard something too. My mom was surprisingly calm and just let me finish. When I finished, I waited for her to say something in panic or anything, but she just said in a gentle, calm voice that I probably just woke up from a bad dream. I doubled down and swore to her that someone was down there. Even Jojo knew it. I asked her if she thought I would just make that up. This is where she paused for a second, and it's because this was the moment she decided to tell me the truth, that my Uncle Steve got sick with cancer and died years ago, and that's why he stopped coming over. Before she could finish her explanation, I told her it's not possible. He's down in the basement right now. She then stopped me and said, "Listen to me. If someone's in the basement, you need to call the cops right now." So that's what I did. I hung up, dialed 911, and told them of a break-in. Jojo and I waited in my bedroom until there was a knock at the front door, followed by the doorbell. I ran downstairs to let them in, and eagerly pointed them to the basement. The basement door was still basically jammed shut like I left it. They told me to wait up there, but I didn't listen. I insisted on going down with them. I reenacted everything as we went down. What I heard, when, and where. Then I showed them where I looked around. Then I pointed to the one spot I didn't check. The laundry room, where I heard the sound. They went to open the door, and I showed them the light switch. When the light turned on, there was no one inside. The laundry room looked how it always looked. There was no one hiding in any secret crevices or behind the machines, nothing. It was as void of people as could be before we came in. I knew I was looking crazy right about now. We went back upstairs, and they did a little search of the first floor as well, then the upstairs. The house was as clear as it could be. There was no one there. They were at least pretty level-headed and not demeaning about it, even though they probably thought I was a whack job. They left, and I went back upstairs to call my mom again. She picked up right away, and this is where she finished explaining. My Uncle Steve died years ago, but she didn't want to tell me because she knew I suffered enough loss, and she couldn't bring herself to tell me. So she just played it off like my uncle kinda disappeared, which I yelled at her was infinitely worse, but that also didn't explain my hearing his voice just now in the basement. I calmed down, and then said into the phone, "Mom, I'm scared." She believed what I heard, I know it, and that scared me even more. She tried to convince me everything would be alright, and that my brain was playing tricks on me. I pretended to agree. We hung up, and I pulled Jojo close to me. He was the only thing keeping me from freaking out of my skin that night. I didn't fall asleep for another few hours. For a whole week after that, life in that house was hell. I couldn't go anywhere near that basement door. Jojo wouldn't stare at it anymore, but it was still haunting. I know it was all real because Jojo was reacting to something. Had Jojo not been there, I could have played it off as a late-night hallucination or mind tricks. But no, someone or something was down there. Something that had my uncle's voice. My mom sold that house just a year later. This happened when I was 24 and renting the upstairs of an old house by myself. It wasn't technically an apartment, it was more like the second floor had been turned into its own little living space years ago. There was a bedroom, bathroom, tiny kitchen, and a living room, and the landlord lived out of state, so I almost never saw him. The first floor was empty and had been for months because he was supposedly renovating it before renting it out again. That part always made me a little uneasy because it meant every night I was sleeping above a completely dark, empty floor of the house. Still, the rent was cheap, and I told myself I was being dramatic. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. Then one night around 1 in the morning, while I was in bed doom scrolling, I heard what sounded like a single footstep directly below me. It was so clear that I actually froze and waited for another one. A few seconds later, I heard another. It sounded exactly like someone slowly walking through the first floor living room. I sat up in bed and just listened. I remember thinking maybe it was the house settling, but it didn't sound like that. Old house noises usually had more of a creak or a pop to them. This sounded heavier, like actual weight pressing on floorboards. I stayed still for a long time, then finally convinced myself it had to be nothing. The next day, I checked the first floor on my way out. It was locked. I even opened it and looked inside. The place was empty and dusty, with no furniture except for an old broken table in one room. I felt stupid for being unsettled. The next night, nothing happened. The night after that, it happened again. This time, it started at around 12:30. It was the same thing. Slow footsteps below me. 3 or 4 at a time, then silence, then a few more. It lasted maybe 2 minutes. I muted my TV and stood in the middle of my living room listening down through the floor. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe an animal got in. Maybe pipes somehow sounded like that in this house. But deep down, I knew it sounded like a person moving around. I texted my friend Scott about it, and he made a joke that the downstairs tenant had finally moved in. Over the next week, it kept happening. It was always late at night and always from downstairs. Sometimes it was footsteps, but once it sounded like a cabinet door shutting. That was the first time I got genuinely scared enough to call the landlord. He sounded annoyed more than concerned. He said no one had keys except him and me, and he was out of state. He told me old homes make weird noises, and said if I was really nervous, I could call the police, but he didn't think there was any reason to. That response actually made me more uncomfortable, because now I felt like if something was wrong, I was on my own. One Friday night, I was out later than usual and didn't get home until almost 2. The second I stepped into my upstairs apartment, I felt something was off. I don't know how else to explain it. Nothing looked different, and the lights were off like I'd left them, but something felt different. I stood for a second listening, and everything was quiet, but then directly below me, I heard a thud. It sounded like something had bumped into a wall or a piece of furniture downstairs. I backed up so fast I almost tripped on the rug. I remember just standing there staring at the floor like I could somehow see through it. Then came more footsteps. I left immediately and sat in my car with the doors locked. I actually called the police that time. 2 officers came and checked the whole first floor and outside of the house. They found nothing. One of them said there was no sign of forced entry and no one inside. He was polite about it, but I could tell they both thought I had gotten worked up over house noises. For the next few days, I kept thinking maybe they were right. Then I started noticing little things. Once, I came home from work, and the first floor door was open by maybe an inch. I knew I closed it after the police were there. Another time, I smelled cigarette smoke outside the side of the house near one of the downstairs windows. I don't smoke, and neither do any of my nearby neighbors. At least not from what I knew. Then one night, I heard the footsteps again. Only this time, they stopped directly beneath my bedroom. I was lying in bed, and it sounded like whoever it was standing still in the room below me. I held my breath and listened. After maybe 10 seconds, I heard a very light tapping sound. 3 taps, then silence. I can't explain the feeling going through my body at that point. It felt like I was being watched in that moment, even though that made no logical sense. I grabbed my phone and texted my friend asking if I could come stay at his place. While I was waiting for him to answer, I heard the tapping again. 3 more taps in the same spot. I left without even changing clothes. The next day, my friend came back with me because I didn't want to be there alone. We checked the whole place and again found nothing, but when we got to the downstairs kitchen, he crouched near one of the lower cabinets and said, "What is that?" There was a cigarette butt jammed way in the back under the cabinet toe kick, almost hidden. It looked fresh. That instantly made everything real for me. Somebody had been in there. At that point, I stopped caring if I sounded paranoid. I called the landlord again and told him exactly what we found. He seemed more concerned this time and said he'd drive over the next day. That night, I stayed somewhere else. When he got there the following afternoon, he called me and said there was nothing obvious, but one of the back windows downstairs didn't lock right. It looked closed, but from outside, it could be forced up enough for a thin person to get in. He said maybe somebody local had figured that out and was using the empty first floor when no one was around. Hearing that made me feel sick. I asked him if he was going to fix it right away, and he said yes, but I'd already decided I was done. What really pushed me over the edge happened that same evening when I went back one last time to get some clothes and my laptop. I was upstairs stuffing things into a duffel bag when I heard a sound come from below that I hadn't heard before. It was a cough, and there was no mistaking it. It came from the first floor hallway. For about 2 seconds, I just stood there digesting what I just heard. Then I grabbed the bag and ran out so fast I left half my stuff there. I called the cops again from my car. This time they actually found evidence someone had been coming in. Near the back window, there were fresh marks and dirt on the sill, and in a closet downstairs, they found an old blanket I had never seen before. I moved out that weekend. Ever since then, any sound in the house at night hits me differently. My name is Chris, and this happened when I was 22. I was living in the upstairs of a mother-daughter house owned by our parents, with my older brother Tom living downstairs. The setup was pretty simple. My part of the house upstairs was one big open space for the living room, kitchen, and dining area, then a hallway that led to the bathroom, a spare bedroom I used as a big walk-in closet, and my bedroom at the end. Tom had his own separate entrance downstairs, and we had a door that connected the 2 floors from inside. It worked out well because we had our own space, but could still get to each other if needed. One week, Tom went to Mexico with his fiancée, so I had the whole place to myself. The night in question started completely normal. I got home around 7, threw something on TV, and started cooking dinner. Chicken and rice, something simple that didn't require much attention. I had the TV going in the background, and everything was normal. Around the time I was cleaning up, I thought I heard a noise from downstairs. I'm not sure how to describe it other than just a basic thud. Like it could have came from the wall, on the floor, I don't know. Just a thud. I stopped what I was doing and listened for a bit. I assumed it was something settling or something falling over slightly. The normal assumptions. The downstairs had been empty for a few days already since Tom left. Still, it felt random enough that I muted the TV and stood there for a bit. I didn't hear anything else, but I didn't like the feeling of ignoring it. So I went over to the door that led downstairs, which was already open, and went down to check. I turned on the lights and walked through every room. His living room, kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. Everything looked exactly how it should. So I went back upstairs, finished cleaning, put everything away, and then sat on the couch for a while watching TV. After maybe an hour or so, I got tired and decided to go to bed. It didn't take long for me to start drifting off. Then, out of the blue, I heard music start playing from the living room. It was loud enough to instantly wake me up. It took me a second to even process what I was hearing. It was coming from my Amazon Alexa on the counter in the kitchen area. The song itself was some kind of slow instrumental song I had never heard before. It had a sort of dark vibe to it. I yelled Alexa stop from my bed a couple times, but it didn't respond. I got more annoyed than anything and got out of bed, went into the hallway, and said, "Alexa, stop," louder. The music shut off right away. I looked at it for a second, pretty much knowing it was likely just a glitch. I went back into my room and got back into bed. A few minutes later, just as I was starting to fall asleep again, I heard the Alexa say, "Sorry, I didn't quite get that."
I'm having trouble understanding.
I got up again, walked into the living room, and unplugged it from the wall completely. I remember thinking that would be the end of it. Clearly that confirmed the thing was glitching out. I went back to my room, and this time I fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke up suddenly to loud music again. It took me a second to even understand what was happening because I was still half asleep. Then it hit me. The music was coming from the living room again. I shot out of bed immediately because I remember unplugging the Alexa. There was no way it should have been on. I walked down the hallway slower this time. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but I felt very uncomfortable now. I called out, "Alexa, stop," as I got closer, and the music shut off instantly. I then looked at the counter. The Alexa was plugged back into the wall. I just stood there staring at it for a few seconds. You would too if you were in the same situation. I knew without a doubt I unplugged it, unless I sleepwalked and plugged it back in. I remember pulling the cord out myself. There was no doubt about that. That's when that feeling in your stomach that something's really wrong hit me. I didn't check anything else because I was too scared. I turned and went straight back to my room and locked the door. Thank God it had a lock. I grabbed my phone and texted Tom asking if he came back early and was messing with me. But as I was typing, I saw at the top of the screen under his name, it said, "Location Mexico." If this didn't already seem weird, now this felt straight up like a nightmare. I pulled the chair over to the door so I could sit and listen for anything on the other side. I didn't hear anything at first. Everything was completely quiet. I stayed like that for probably 10 minutes with my ear up on the door. Then I heard something that I will never forget. From out in the living room, I heard a whisper. It was quiet, but clear enough to understand what it was. It said, "Alexa, play," and then something I couldn't make out. My entire body went numb. It was like all the weight dropped out of me at once. Before I could react, the Alexa responded, and music started blasting again from the living room. I don't think I've ever felt that kind of dreadful fear before. I grabbed my phone and called 911, but instead of being quiet about it, I just started yelling that I was calling 911 and telling whoever was out there to get the F out. I don't know why I did that. I think I just panicked. I was 22, scared, and defenseless. My first priority wasn't getting this person arrested, rather just getting them out. The music was so loud I couldn't hear anything else. I had no idea if the person was still out there or not. The operator answered, and I told them someone was in my house. When the song finally ended, I yelled, "Alexa, stop," again from inside my room. It worked. The cops showed up a few minutes later. I stayed in my room until they were inside and calling my name. When I came out, I explained everything as best I could. They checked the entire upstairs and then went downstairs too. After a few minutes, they came back and said there was no one in the house. I don't know if that made me feel good or bad. Good on one hand that the danger was gone. Bad on the other that they got away. One of them told me that my front door was wide open when they got there. That front door was without a doubt locked, at the very least closed. That meant whoever it was had left through there, but it didn't explain how they got in. The officers eventually left after telling me to call again if anything else happened. I locked the front door, locked the door to the downstairs, and didn't sleep much the rest of that night. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about something. The downstairs apartment had been empty for days while Tom was gone. There was a part of me that couldn't shake the idea that someone might have been staying down there and just came upstairs that night to harass me and scare me. That thought bothered me more than anything else that actually happened, so I stayed at a friend's place the next night. When Tom got back 2 days later, I'd already told him everything. We went through both parts of the house again and didn't find anything obvious missing or out of place. My brother only believed me because I showed him proof of the police having come there. Otherwise, he'd have thought it was a joke to scare him. The first thing we did was install cameras around the house, front, back, and inside by both doors. Nothing like that happened after that. Eventually, our parents made us get our own apartment so they could rent that house out for extra income. In a weird way, I was happy to get out of there because when something like this happens, it sticks with you, and it becomes attached mentally to that place where it happened. For a while, I was talking to this girl named Tori, and I really liked her a lot. Things didn't really work out in the end, but while we were talking, we'd talk like every night. Over the phone usually, sometimes FaceTime. This was last July. We were in the middle of an extreme heat wave. I was playing FIFA with my friend Carl when my phone started ringing. It was Tori, almost right on time. I had come to expect a call from her every night around 9. So I told Carl that we'd play the second half later and to keep his console on. I picked up the phone and started chatting with Tori. She lives 20 minutes away from me, and it was a work night. So when she asked me to come over, I told her I wish I could, but I'd be down tomorrow. She told me how her parents had been gone all day, and she didn't know where they were. Her parents were an interesting couple. They weren't neglectful or anything, but they were very unconcerned. Like, they'd let Tori do whatever she wanted, basically, and not really ask her where she was or what she was doing. Plus, they themselves would go out 3 nights a week to eat or hit bars or comedy clubs or whatever, and it wasn't uncommon that they'd be gone multiple nights in a row. This was one of those nights. We were just BSing over the phone, talking about how neither of us wanted to go to school or work the next day, and a bunch of other boring stuff. Then she said she was going to go cook some pasta, and she'd call me when she's done. So during that time, I told Carl to hop back on FIFA, and we resumed our game. By the time the game was over, I was expecting Tori to call back at any moment. She didn't, though. Not for a while, at least. I tried FaceTiming her after a while, and the first call didn't go through. So after 5 minutes, I tried again, and she picked up. She was in her living room walking upstairs. As she picked up, she said she was confused, and I asked why. She said because the front door was open as she went down to the kitchen to make pasta, but her dad's car wasn't in the driveway, so her parents weren't back yet. She kept acting all worried and scared, joking that someone's in her house and gonna kill her. I would laugh and mess with her, saying you're probably right, and she'd playfully tell me to stop. She got back to her room and was laying in her bed, and about a minute later, she remembered she left the pasta boiling for too long, and she ran downstairs to the kitchen, leaving her phone behind. Her phone was left with the screen down and the camera facing the ceiling, so all I saw on the screen was her white ceiling and the colorful moving shapes and patterns from her little light projector. Then I heard Tori yelling angrily from downstairs, probably about her overcooked pasta. But along with that, there was a noise that seemed to come from inside of her room. I kept looking at the screen, curious now. My curiosity turned to horror when I saw a man's face appear in frame, but just for a second, and only like half his face. He looked directly at the camera. I felt as though I made eye contact with him for a second. Then he disappeared again. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know her house phone number, and I couldn't scream for her to run. But with my TV in the background playing the FIFA main menu screen music, he surely knew someone was on the line with her. I was panicking, so without hanging up, I ran to get my house phone and called 911, telling them to get to Tori's address immediately because of a break-in, and that I couldn't talk long given the situation. I brought the phone to my room with me without hanging up and picked up my iPhone again. It was around the same time Tori came rushing back into her room with a bowl of pasta steaming hot. She was still talking in her calm, sweet, innocent voice, apologizing for being gone too long. I didn't know what to do. That man might have been in her room, in her closet, under her bed. I wanted to warn her, but I couldn't without the chance of her being attacked. I tried to stall until the police got there, and I had the police still on the phone, listening to my FaceTime call. I heard the 911 operator tell me to somehow get Tori to go outside. I was tasked with a seemingly impossible task without making it obvious. I knew if I tried to warn her in any way, she'd freak out and make it obvious. So I told her calmly, "Go outside. Carl's outside in his car. He has your backpack." For the record, she left her backpack at my house, and I was pretending Carl was dropping it off. This worked. She got up, albeit slightly confused as to why he was dropping it off, but she put on her slides and went outside. This was when I yelled at her to run next door to her neighbors now, and that someone was in her house. She immediately freaked out and started crying, understandably. She pounded on her neighbor's door, who thank God answered quickly. I drove over there right away after that, and by then police were there and inside the house. Unfortunately, this story didn't have a totally happy ending. That intruder made his escape before police got there, likely wise to the fact that police were coming. We locked all her doors before going to sleep at my place that night. A month later, we stopped talking, because she found a better guy, I guess. You'd think after this, we'd have started dating the next week. That didn't happen. But recently, we've been friendly again, just not the same. But aside from that, it really is so disturbing thinking that he may have been under her bed or in her closet, listening to us. I wish I screenshotted his face when I had the chance. My best friend Casey and I usually go out together on the weekends. We're kind of inseparable most of the time, but there was this one weekend that I had COVID, and so I couldn't go out with her. She went out with our other friends Connie and Rachel. They went to this outdoor beachside bar that I'd wanted to go to but never had been, so I was obviously very upset and kind of jealous. Honestly, because of this, I was a little salty and not answering Casey that eagerly, or the other two for that matter. I went about my night watching stupid movies in my bed, sneezing all over the place and generally feeling like death. Eventually I picked up my phone and realized Connie and Rachel had blown up the group chat, asking Casey where she was, and then asking me if Casey had texted me at all. I went to check my text from Casey, but she hadn't sent anything besides her last text that I ignored, so I sent a "Hey, you okay?" and it delivered. Phone was still on, that's good. The girls told me the last time they saw Casey was when she was with some guy at the bar, and that the next time they went back to where she was, they were gone. I told them to calm down, that she was probably still with the guy, though I would know more than anyone that it wouldn't be like Casey to leave with a guy without saying something, unless she was really, really drunk. I tried FaceTiming her, and someone picked up, but it wasn't Casey. It wasn't anybody, actually. It was just some dark room. Whoever picked it up was clearly hiding off camera. "Hello?" I asked. "Where's Casey?" I asked over and over until the call ended. I started spamming Casey's number, blowing up her phone asking where she is, who has her phone, etc. Then, to my surprise, I was getting a FaceTime call from her number. I picked up, and this time there was a man's whispering voice on the other end. He claimed Casey was fine, that she came home with him and now she was passed out in his bed. I asked him who he was, and he said they met at the bar. I tried to fact check this and ask what bar, and he said the right one. His story seemed to be checking out, but I asked him why he wouldn't show me his face and why he was whispering. He said it's too dark in the room and that Casey was sleeping and he didn't want to wake her up. The first part of that answer made no sense. I told him turn on the light and show me that Casey's okay. There was silence for a second, and then the call ended. I told Connie and Rachel about this, and they were equally concerned. After blowing up Casey's phone some more, the guy answered with an address and said, "We're here, come pick up your friend." The location was some small-looking house 15 minutes away. I told the girls, and by now they left to the outside of the bar so they could talk to me on the phone. They agreed something wasn't right, and that I shouldn't go to that address. I then remembered I had Casey's mom's number buried deep in my phone, so after finding that, I texted, then called her, and she picked up, explaining Casey was in fact home, and had been for half an hour, crying but not explaining what happened. So I FaceTimed Casey's phone one more time, and it answered to the dark room again. I said hello a bunch of times, no response, so I threw out some bait, and said I'm on my way. And then the whispering voice replied from somewhere off screen, "Good, don't knock, just come right in." Then I reeled the bait back in and said, "I know you're not with Casey. I'm calling the police on you right now." And then something I didn't expect happened, and it freaked me the hell out. In a split second, the phone was picked up off wherever it was sitting, and all I saw in frame was this ugly, creepy-looking man looking into the camera. He was smiling this insanely wide smile, and his eyes were open as wide as could be. It's as if he was trying to make as scary of a face as possible. I hung up because I couldn't look at it. So Casey was leaving the bar with the guy she was with, and they got into what she thought was an Uber, but the driver and the guy she met were acting weird, and she found out that they knew each other somehow. Suspicious it was a trap, she got out of the car the first chance she got, but she didn't have her phone on her anymore. She borrowed some random person's phone to call her mother to pick her up. Casey and her mom called the police, and I met them at the house address that was provided via text. I met them there, but didn't get close to anyone to not get them sick. Casey's phone's last location on Find My iPhone was indeed at that house address, so police knocked on the door and no one answered. There wasn't anything they could do, but they suggested to call 911 again in the morning and knock again then, and that's what they did. And the next morning, an older man answered and claimed he didn't have anyone's phone, nor did any young men live in this house, nor did he know anything about the entire story. Casey says he might have been the driver in the car, but she can't tell for sure. There was not much else that could be done. Casey's phone was off, and the last location was never updated again. Do we know for a fact Casey dodged a bullet? Yes. Do we know what that bullet was? Hell no. One night I was home alone with my brother. It was during a snowstorm in January. My parents were both away. My little brother was in his room doing whatever, while I was playing League of Legends on my computer. I get a knock on my door, and my little brother asks if I can drive him to his friend's house. I agreed to, only because I have a Pathfinder which does well in those snowy and icy conditions. Plus his friend only lives about 5 minutes away. So we left, and I was back within literally 15 minutes. I entered the house as I left it, quiet and empty. I went back to playing League on my computer. I FaceTimed my friend Jay, who was also playing. I would always do this and lean my phone on my monitor so it would be facing me and I could see the screen. This went on for a solid hour or two, before I heard a sound from downstairs, and I assumed my little brother got a ride back. Or hell, I assumed it was maybe our cat. I didn't go down to check though. A few minutes later, when I least expected it, Jay suddenly said, "Mark, I think your brother's sneaking up on you." I turned around but didn't see anyone. "What are you talking about?" I said. And he said he saw him peering around for a second from behind the wall. Now, to explain the layout of my room a bit, my bedroom is a loft, and there's a dividing wall that separates the stairway from the rest of the room. That wall was where Jay was claiming to have seen my brother peeking at me. So I called my brother's name, and he didn't answer. I went over to check the stairway, and he wasn't there either. I wasn't sure if Jay was joking around or not at first, so I pressed him, and he kept saying he wasn't lying. So I left my room to check the rest of the upstairs. I checked my little brother's room first. His lights were out and his door was shut, so maybe he wasn't home. I checked my parents' room, and then the spare bedroom, also nothing. Plus the front door to the house was still shut and locked. So at that moment, I was thinking Jay was trying to scare me or he just was seeing things. Then I realized our cat Sunshine wasn't anywhere to be seen, and maybe she was the one who made the noise. I went down to the den and found her hiding in the corner behind one of the couches. That was odd behavior for her, and it made me more paranoid. Then I heard something. And you know when you're in a dead silent room with someone else, you can just hear their movements. Like the slightest thing even, just the sound of the cloth of their clothes rubbing on something. I heard that slightest bit of sound from behind the sectional couch in the corner of the room. I stood up and got just one step closer, and I heard a slight exhale. It was quiet, but audible enough for me to hear it. I didn't run. I walked upstairs to the kitchen, grabbed the phone, went to my room, locked the door, and called 911. Jay was still on the FaceTime. I kept him on and let him listen to my call with 911. The police arrived very quickly, and I opened the front door for them. "Where are they?" the first thing they asked at the front door, and I told them downstairs in the den. The police started shouting, making their presence known, and I didn't see it happen, but they found the intruder with his hands up behind the couch in the same spot I heard him. It was a white male in his mid-20s. He had a large blade in his pocket that God only knows what he was planning on doing with. Thank God he didn't hurt our cat while he was down there. Sunshine hiding all scared like that also may have made me stop and listen for that 5 seconds that I did. Being on FaceTime with Jay like that also probably saved my life. I think the guy saw or just heard me on FaceTime with my friend and didn't want to witness to anything. Him hiding in the den like that instead of leaving makes me think he was planning on waiting until everyone in the house was asleep. This was my fault for not locking the door when I dropped my brother off, which I used to do because we live in a cliché safe neighborhood, but no one's ever really safe. My family was all appalled, but proud of me for how I handled the situation. The intruder's name was Richard Taylor, and he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. I was on Instagram browsing through my feed. I saw my best friend Alexis posted a picture of herself sitting by the side of her backyard pool with her friend, so I liked it and planned on leaving a comment. I read through all her other comments first, and at the very bottom, a comment left only a minute ago was from a man with the username Jam00235. It said, "You are a very hot little lady." I should mention we're both 16, and when I clicked on this guy's profile, he appeared to be like 40. Most of his pictures were of random landscapes. Some were of varying random objects, like a half-full bottle of beer and some weird stone statue. Most of his pictures had no likes. Some had like 1 or 2 likes at most. He only had 15 followers, yet he followed over 100 people, including Alexis. I texted her about the comment and told her she should remove it and block his account. She promptly replied, "Yeah, I know, it's so creepy."
She blocked the account, and I went about liking and commenting on the picture like I originally planned on doing. The next day after school, Alexis and I walked home together since we lived right across the street from each other. On our way home, we noticed a white car driving slowly in the street next to us. It was a little suspect, so Alexis told me to come to her house with her. Whoever was driving that car slowed down when we got to her house, then sped away as soon as we entered. It was the sketchiest thing we'd ever seen, and we almost felt like we were being followed. I stayed over Lexi's house the rest of the day. We worked on our biology project together. Then we just hung out until late at night since we had no school the next day. It was often that I'd spend the whole day at Lexi's house. This was one of those times. We ordered a pizza since Lexi's parents weren't home. That also meant it was just the two of us in the house, so we were being as loud as we wanted. We heard a knock at the front door of the house. Just slightly though, since we were upstairs in her room. Alexis went downstairs to open the door, but she's a really cautious person, so when I didn't hear her open the front door, I had a feeling she was peeking out the window to make sure it was the pizza guy. I was confused when I heard her quietly rushing back up the stairs into her room. She shut the door and looked at me with her mouth wide open, and said there's some creepy guy on her stoop. I didn't believe her. I thought it had to be the pizza guy. I went downstairs with her to check the window. There was no one on the stoop though. As she was swearing that she wasn't lying, the doorknob to the back door turned. Someone tried pushing the door open, but the lock prevented it. We looked at each other with horrified expressions on our faces and ran back to her room. She locked the door and sat in fear on her bed. We thought as long as we waited in her room, we'd be okay, and whoever was out there would go away. But something completely unexpected happened next. Alexis screamed and pointed at the window, where a man's head was visible, looking into the room. The man was holding a camera up to the glass. What made the sight even more horrifying was the fact that we were on the second floor, which meant this man climbed up onto the patio roof. I screamed in horror too as we ran to the basement, perhaps the safest place in the house. We stayed down there the rest of the night until Lexi's parents came home, and we told them all about what happened. They were shocked, but really what could anyone do? I went home that night to see a text on my phone from Alexis, saying she just looked back at the random man's Instagram account and saw that the person's face matched the person who was at the window. I looked at it too and agreed. I told her to report the account to the authorities. She didn't know how. Honestly, I didn't either, so I told her to wait until the next day to figure it out. However, the next day, the account was deleted. Either that or renamed. No one ever saw that man again, but we do keep our Instagram accounts on private now. My friends and I have a Snapchat group together, which means when someone sends a picture to the group, everyone gets the picture. There's 5 of us in the group: Marvin, Glenn, Joe, and Jared. One day at school, Jared told me he lost his phone and didn't have Find My iPhone on, which sucked for him, but oh well, what could we really do about it? The rest of us continued about our daily lives. I was at the gas station and saw a funny-looking guy who looked like he didn't know how to use a gas pump, so I thought it would be funny to sneak a quick video of him and send it to the Snap group that I had with my friends. I got home and checked Snapchat, and saw the Snap was opened. I checked which of my friends opened it, and was kind of surprised to see Jared's name under the opened list. I texted Jared asking if he found his phone, but the text never said delivered. I asked all my other friends if they'd spoken to Jared about his phone. Joe said he was hanging out with Jared as we spoke. He also said Jared did not find his phone. He put Jared on the phone for me and told me to come over. When I got to Joe's house, he and Jared had already thought to look at the Snap map to see that the location had not been turned off, and it said whoever was using Jared's phone last opened it 4 minutes ago. Its location was an abandoned construction grounds. Ready to go kick some ass, or at least thinking we were, we agreed to drive down to the construction site. Getting there was quick and easy, but hopping the fence and navigating in the dark was a different story. According to the Snap map, Jared's iPhone was somewhere in a big abandoned building in front of us. The three of us, all above 6 foot, definitely felt we could get the better of anyone in a fight. But what was this person doing in this building at this hour? The situation was just too unsettling. We found a big hole in the wall where we could enter the building. Joe and I used our phone lights to find our way through the building. It was cold and empty in there, besides the rubble and graffiti everywhere, and every little sound created an echo. The last time Snapchat updated Jared's location was 5 minutes ago, but the location was right on top of us. It didn't seem like anyone or anything was on the first floor, so we went to the second floor. We found ourselves in a big empty room. Joe checked the location of Jared's phone one more time, and it appeared that all three of our phones were in the same exact location, which was weird. Where could his phone be? The sound of a digital camera shutter, accompanied with a blindingly bright flash coming from an adjacent room, made the three of us freeze like a deer in headlights. Then Jared was the first one to run for it, screaming. Joe and I followed suit, running back down the stairs and out the hole to the outside. We got to the car and drove back to Joe's house. On the way back, Joe and I got a Snapchat from Jared's phone. I was the first one to open it, and it was a picture of the three of us, standing in that room, with the caption, "Run." We never went back to that building for his phone. In fact, after that, the location on Jared's phone was turned off, until of course, Jared signed in on a different phone. All my friends were telling me to make a Tinder, so I figured why not. I set up an account and used 4 of the best pictures of myself I could find. Pretty soon I was already getting matches. I sent a message to just about everyone who matched me on the first day. Only 3 responded, one of whom was a gorgeous brunette girl who was just so easy to talk to. Everything I said she had a perfect response to. Even when I said something awkward or regrettable, she'd reply in a way that would fix it and make me feel better about what I said. I quickly got her number. I was a little disappointed to see green text instead of blue text, meaning she didn't also have an iPhone, but we quickly made plans to meet up that same night. She wanted me to come over to her place to hang out. I was okay with that. It said her house was 20 minutes away on my phone. I left around 9 p.m. and pulled up to the address. Apparently it was a small condominium type building. Honestly, it looked kind of ghetto and sketchy. I texted her to let her know I was there. She replied back quickly saying the outside door was broken, so I'd have to enter the condo from the front door and knock on the door in the hallway. The hallways had a weird, dreary lighting about them, and the doors to the condos looked kind of worn out. It was a tiny place. There were maybe 10 condos in total in the whole building. I came to the door with the number 7 on it, the door she told me to come to, and noticed it was half open. Inside, I could see a dark apartment-like room lit up only by the blue glow of the TV that was on. I knocked on the door, making it open a little more, making the crack between the door and the door hinges slightly bigger, which allowed me to see someone standing behind the door, with their eye pressed up to the crack, looking at me. It appeared they were waiting for me to enter, to catch me by surprise and grab me. I figured this out right away, so I pulled the door shut and took the few seconds of time it might buy me to run back out the door I came in and back to my car. I drove home feeling like my heart was punching my chest the whole way back. I deleted my Tinder that same night and never touched the app since. My friend Keith has an uncle with dementia. Long story short, his uncle usually lives with his grandma, but she was in Florida with some church group for the week, and Keith was going on a business trip, so while he was gone, he hired me to house sit. This included watching after and taking care of his uncle. I'll call him Uncle Nick. Keith would only be gone for 2 days. On the first day of my house sitting, I mostly just hung out in the backyard reading and tanning, or in the living room watching TV. I cooked twice. Each time I made extra food for Uncle Nick, but I never saw him come out of his room upstairs. I went up to knock on his door lightly and tell him I made food. I heard a grunting noise on the other side of the door. I assumed that was his way of acknowledging me. I never actually met his uncle. Oddly enough, we weren't introduced when Keith hired me for this little job. Uncle Nick was fully aware of my being there, at least that's what Keith said. He never left his room to eat while I was in the living room, so I went up to Keith's spare room for the night. I left the door cracked open so I could listen, and I eventually heard a door down the hall opening and unsettlingly quick and heavy footsteps moving down the hall and down the stairs. Seconds later, I heard the same footsteps rush back up the stairs and back to the room. Then the door slammed shut. It was honestly a little unnerving. Hard to explain, just the intensity of his footsteps, like he was avoiding me or something. The next day was pretty similar to the first. I made 2 meals and left the food on the counter for Uncle Nick both times. When I was laying in the backyard again, I came back in to see the plate was empty. So I guess he was really avoiding me. I went back out to tan some more, and when I thought about it, I looked up to the bedroom Nick was staying at, and there he was, looking at me through the window. I think when he noticed me, he ducked down. I felt so uncomfortable that I folded up the blanket and went back inside and up to the spare bedroom. It was okay. One more night of this and I'd be home. I made dinner that night and left him another plate. As I walked up to the spare bedroom, I noticed his bedroom door was open now. First time I'd seen that. Maybe he was becoming less shy. I went to brush my teeth and go to my room for the rest of the night to give him his space. I was having a rough time sleeping though. I just wasn't tired at all. While laying there in the dark, I heard a short creaking sound coming from inside the room, even over the noise of the fan next to me. I sat up and looked around, still able to slightly see in the dark room. I didn't see anything. More specifically, I didn't see Uncle Nick. I was getting paranoid, honestly. Why was I becoming so creeped out by him? I lay back down on my side, facing the wall next to the bed. I ignored the little sounds I thought I was hearing in my head for the most part, but when I heard a very faint groan, I sat up and turned off the fan to listen. I heard breathing. I turned to the far right side of the room by the desk, and there he was, sitting on the desk chair, turned to me. I screamed in fear, and he came up to me going shh and covered my mouth with his hand. In a moment, I thought he was trying to suffocate me, so I pushed him off of me and ran to the nearest bathroom to lock the door. I listened as I heard his manic footsteps rush back to his room and slam the door. My heart was pounding inside my chest. I called Keith and told him about it. He sounded like he wasn't even that shocked. That's the scary thing. He told me it's best I sleep in the bathroom with the door locked. And when he said that, it said to me that his Uncle Nick is potentially dangerous, which scares me even more. I slept maybe 3 hours max that night on the bathroom floor, and in the morning I quickly packed my backpack and waited out in the backyard for Keith to return. He paid me extra for what I had to deal with, and I suggested he get his uncle some serious help, because I think he has more than dementia, and I still don't know what his intentions were that night. My dad once told us a true scary story of his from when he was in his 20s. When he was still living with my grandparents, he lived next door to this older couple in their 60s. One winter, the wife Margie next door went missing. The husband knocked on their door and asked my grandparents if they'd seen her, but unfortunately they hadn't. No one had, apparently. A few days later, my dad was out at the park playing football with friends. That's when it started to snow. They played in the snow for a while until it got to be too much. Then they all went their separate ways back home. When my dad got home, he realized his parents were gone. My dad started the fireplace and went to his room, which was adjacent to the living room, to throw his stuff on his bed. Then he went to take a warm shower. When he got out from the shower, he thought he heard humming from the living room outside the bathroom. He opened the door a crack in his towel and said, "Mom?" The humming stopped, but a creaking sound continued. My dad threw on his clothes in the bathroom and walked out into the living room. There in my grandpa's old rocking sofa chair was Margie from next door. She looked straight at my dad and said, "It was so cold, I needed to get warm." My dad ran next door to get the husband, but when the two of them returned to the living room, the sofa chair was empty and Margie was gone. The two of them searched the whole house together, calling her name, but she wasn't there. Now, this much of the story was enough to creep me out already when my dad told it to us, but it didn't end there, and the really scary part didn't happen until the next day, when Margie's dead body was found in the man next door's crawl space, where she apparently tripped and sliced her head open on a sharp object. He only found her because the smell became so unbearable he smelt it from the garage. The thing is, the body was deemed to have been dead for at least 3 days, yet my dad saw her in the living room just the day before. To this day, my dad believes he saw the ghost of Margie in my grandparents' living room that day. And my dad's not one to make stuff like this up. When he first told us this story when I was 9, let's just say I didn't get much sleep that night. There's a lot of Black Lives Matter protesting going on in my area. Now, before I write anything else, I want to disclose that I fully support the Black Lives Matter movement. However, this is my personal opinion that the looting and rioting are not okay, and anyone participating in those acts should not be associated with the peaceful protesters. But unfortunately, mixed in with the peaceful protesters are the looters and rioters hiding in plain sight. A few nights ago, many stores and houses in the town next to mine were broken into and robbed, and a lot of car windows were smashed. There were rumors from the cops in our friend group that our town would be a target the next night. We stayed up a little later than usual the next night for that reason, and while watching a movie together as a family, we had to mute the TV when we heard yells from outside. We checked out the window, and a large group of young men with masks on were parading down the street. They weren't holding protest signs or anything. They were just being loud and, by the sound of it, cursing a lot. But they didn't appear to be damaging any property, so we went back to our movie. Then after that, my parents went to sleep. I stayed up later in my room, playing a video game with the headset on so I could talk to my friends. Eventually, I grew bored and tired and turned the system off and went downstairs to get a glass of water for bed. As I passed the little half stairway to our den on my way to the kitchen, I looked down there and saw something big sitting on the carpet by the window. I went down the stairs, and when I picked it up, I realized what it was. It was the glass of the window broken, but all taped up as if to make the glass shattering easier or quieter. I ran to my parents' room to get my dad. When he saw it, he called the police. The response time was outrageously long. My dad said we were lucky the line wasn't busy, as the 911 calls recently by us have skyrocketed. When the police came to search the house, it didn't seem anything was stolen or anyone was in the house. I had to respond to another call within 20 minutes, but they said to call back if something else happened. My dad and I opted to sleep in the den for the rest of the night to prevent anything else from happening, so my mom went back upstairs. Time rolled on slowly, but eventually I think my dad fell asleep. A large rift of wind hit me in the face through the opening where glass used to be, causing me to open my eyes and look at the window. No one was out there, but for some reason I thought I heard something come from upstairs. So I went up the half flight of stairs thinking maybe it was my mom. When I got to the kitchen, I continued to hear noises from above me, so I walked upstairs, and the noises were still coming from above me. What else was above? The attic. I went to the upstairs storage room, which had the attic door. I quietly opened it, revealing the short stairway to the attic. This is when the noises stopped. I didn't flick the light switch on. I just tiptoed halfway up the stairs to listen. That's all. The heavy silence was terrifying, considering I knew I was hearing noises from up here just a second ago. I waited on one of the middle steps to hear something. Then I felt the hairs on my head being moved. Someone's fingers started running through the curls in my hair as I heard this deep, short, cackling sound. I let out a cry for help from my dad, as all the confidence immediately left my body and I was overcome with horror. I ran out from the attic to meet my dad halfway down at the kitchen. He didn't go up to the attic. He once again called the police instead, while we heard shuffling and thumps from above us. The cops once again came, and upon entering the attic with their guns drawn, were able to locate someone. They came out of the attic with some creepy old man with a mask on, looking at my family and I and laughing as he walked out. When the cops asked him in the back of the car what he was planning on doing, he simply admitted right away that he's seen all the looting going on the news, that he wanted to join in on the fun. He made his way to our attic because he said that's where people store their most valuable possessions. Based on the way the man spoke and acted in general, you could tell he was certifiably insane. He told the cops that he was alone. Oddly enough, he answered all their questions no problem. But once again, this guy clearly had some screws loose or missing entirely. Feeling him brush his hand through my hair like that will probably haunt me for a long time, maybe even life. And one thing is for sure, I don't feel safe going in that attic anymore.
This happened last October, close to Halloween. My parents and brother were making the trip from Florida to Tennessee to help my grandmother move into our house, and they wouldn't be back for a few days. Naturally, I thought it would be nice to have the house to myself for a couple days instead of traveling for hours in a car. On the second night of enjoying the alone time in my house, my heart dropped when I heard almost what sounded like a hand slap against my bedroom window. My house is one story in a rural area with few neighbors. After ruling out any animals or natural ways this could have happened, I decided to take a look for myself, so I moved the blinds to see if I could get a look at anyone running, hoping it was just a prank. I was almost annoyed to see no one, but what happened next made the situation go from confusing to frightening. When I started to hear the doorknob to the door being forcefully shaken and twisted, causing almost a bang at the door, and because of this, my dog started barking loudly, increasing my adrenaline in the situation. Thinking it could still just possibly be a prank by one of my few friends that knew I was alone, I began recording a video on Snapchat to send to my friends so that I could maybe confirm it was one of them. The first video starts with me standing a few feet back from the door to see if I could record it being moved again, and eventually I try to record outside the glass doors. The video ends when I'm terrified to hear behind me that my screened-in patio back door was just forced open. Before I could even turn around, my phone drops to the floor. I send the first video to my 3 friends. Whoever this was behind my house still couldn't get inside, but it was freaking me out knowing they weren't afraid to try. I wait a few minutes, and 2 of my friends send snaps from their homes, claiming their innocence and asking to keep them updated. Still a little freaked out, I realized my last friend Logan had opened the snap but didn't respond, which ironically would be the one person out of my group to try something like this. Feeling more confident it was Logan, I decided to start a new video with flash on and try to take a look from the backyard if there was anyone in the open grass yard. After making sure the front door was locked, I walked out hoping Logan would pop out to try and scare me. I checked behind some bushes and scrap wood on the side of my house, but instead I was greeted with just darkness and quiet. Only after 15 seconds of walking outside, I was immediately uncomfortable with the situation I was putting myself in. My fears got the better of me, and I decided to just go back inside. I stopped the video and returned to my living room. Logan finally responds to my snap, causing my breathing to halt when I see a picture of him in bed with his girlfriend saying, "What the fuck, bro? Call the cops." I immediately call 911 and make sure no windows or doors could be unlocked. I was advised to keep all doors locked and to call back if I hear any more forceful entry noises. It was only days later that I would re-watch the saved videos to find a creepy black figure watching me behind my tool shed while I searched behind the scrap wood and bushes, almost looking like they were deciding to attack me or not. Seeing it for the first time, and even now, makes me want to throw up from fear. Nothing has happened since, but I still wonder how someone knew I was alone that day, and what could have happened had I made eye contact with the figure watching from the corner of that shed. I'm a 17-year-old boy living in a small neighborhood in the Midwest of the United States. The neighborhood I live in is a tight-knit community, one where everyone knows each other and is usually friendly towards one another. My street is a small cul-de-sac with 3 houses on each side and 1 at the end. The cul-de-sac itself rests on a small hill. At the bottom is a lake surrounded by forest and other houses. It's not a very dense forest, but it's far away from any densely populated city, and it gets very quiet at night, with the exception of some dogs barking, a late-night driver, and on rare occurrences, you can hear a coyote in the distance. One night at around 2 a.m., both my mother and older brother, whom I live with, were off in their respective rooms, either sleeping or just keeping to themselves. I too was about to go to sleep, and at the time was just resting and watching a YouTube video in bed. A few videos in, I heard a strange sound coming from across my room. It was a sort of soft thud, as if someone had lightly tapped the wall across from my bed. I wasn't alarmed when I first heard it, figuring it was my cat Spot coming to sleep at the foot of my bed. I sat up to see what he was doing, but he was nowhere to be found. In fact, there was nothing in my room that was out of place or that could even make such a noise. However, I didn't hear the noise again, so I went back to YouTube, and after a while, completely forgot that it even happened. That was until I heard another noise. But unfortunately for me, this noise was not a quiet thud or tapping sound. It was much more unsettling. Coming from outside, in the direction of the lake, I heard loud screeching sounds. I thought it might have been some kind of animal, but it sounded eerily similar to a child crying, or maybe even screaming. I opened my window to get a better listen to what I was hearing, and took a recording to show my friend. By this point, I was starting to get a bit freaked out, so I went to my brother's room to see if he heard it too. I was hoping that maybe it was all in my head, and that I was just tired. But no, he heard it too. The friend I sent the recording to agreed it was creepy, and sounded like either an animal in pain or a crying kid. The more I thought about it, the creepier it became. If it was an animal in pain, why haven't I ever heard a sound even remotely similar to this in the many years I've lived in this house? It didn't sound even remotely similar to a fox, coyote, or any animals I know about, and this forest isn't big enough for an animal much bigger than that. And if it was a child, why was it alone, screaming and crying in the woods in the middle of the night? And there was that thud that I heard from earlier that night. Was that somehow connected, or is it simply a coincidence that I heard 2 creepy sounds in the matter of minutes? I haven't heard any kind of noises like that since, and by that I am glad. But to this day, it still creeps me out that none of us could truly figure out what could have created those sounds. I live in an apartment in a 2-family house. I'm on the lower level. The owner of the house, Rob, lives upstairs sometimes, but he has multiple houses, so he's not really here that often. Rob and I are pretty much friends by this point, so he tells me when he's going to be gone for extended periods of time. During the time of this story, Rob had told me he'd be gone for 2 weeks out of state. He told me this so that I would know that I could put both my cars in the driveway. I spend a lot of my nights in the living room reading. My level of the house has access to the back door and the deck outside, so you can probably guess where this story's going. I was reading my book on the couch in the living room by the lamp. Complete silence in the room, aside from the night crickets outside. Just the way I liked it. And bang. There was quite literally a bang on the glass of the sliding back door. I obviously jumped out of my skin. That door led to the backyard. Nobody should ever be back there knocking on it. I wondered if maybe Rob had returned early, but that didn't seem likely. It was just one distinct bang, though. It could have been a fox or a possum running into it by accident. Still, I got up to go check it out. I moved the sliding blind out of the way of the door and turned on the deck light. The deck was clear, though, as I thought it would be. I live in the calmest town ever anyway. Break-ins are never heard of here. I closed the blind on the door again, though, just because I do get a little uncomfortable with the idea in the back of my head that someone's outside in the dark just watching me. I think that's a pretty normal feeling. A while passed because I finished a whole nother chapter in my book when it happened again. This time, though, it wasn't just a singular bang. It was a bunch of deliberate knocks or bangs on the glass. It had to be a person. It went on for a bit, so I turned off the lamp, and this is where I picked up my phone and started recording. As I opened the blind and flicked on the light to the deck, the noises stopped, and there wasn't a single person in sight, not even an animal. I looked over the edge of the deck to see if maybe someone jumped over the railing. Nope, nothing. I didn't stay outside for long. I couldn't lock that door quick enough when I went back inside. By this point, I just went to my bedroom and shut the door and laid in my bed. I didn't know what the hell I had just witnessed outside. How there could be knocks at the door one second, then nobody there the next second. I was calling it a night. I wasn't planning on leaving my room again after that. I browsed Instagram and YouTube for a while on my phone, then turned it off and tried to go to sleep. Silence for the longest time. And then right at the foot of my bed, there was a noise. The sound of someone exhaling. I screamed and dove for the light switch, and when the light turned on, my room was empty. I stood paralyzed, breathing heavily for a moment, trying to comprehend what just happened. I searched under the bed and the closet, but there wasn't a soul in my room. I know what I heard, though. It wasn't in my head, just like the door wasn't in my head. I slept in the living room after that, though I didn't feel much safer in there, fearing I'd hear bangs at the back door again. It was a relatively sleepless night for me. Rob told me he's never experienced anything like this, and he couldn't think of anyone who might have wanted to target him for anything. I never had believed in anything paranormal until that night. I haven't had any experiences that intense ever since, though. My cousin Tyler and I used to have sleepovers all the time when we were kids. Always at his house though, because he had the cool house. Back then, before cell phones and modern video games, kids actually used to do normal kid things, like for example, we both loved to play hide and seek at night. One time when we were 9, both our parents were going out for a night in Atlantic City, so they had my other cousin, Tyler's older brother Joe, keep watch on us. An hour into the night, however, Joe told both of us he was going out and not to tell Mom. Tyler and Joe would commonly do this because it mutually benefited them. Tyler loved having the house to himself, and Joe hated staying home all night. By the time he left, it was already a little later in the night, like 9 o'clock. We had our dinners and decided it would be a good idea to play hide and seek. Their house was honestly massive, so it was always a lot of fun. I was hiding first. We started in the basement where Tyler would count. We had a rule that we couldn't use any house lights, only flashlights. Our reason for this was because it just made it cooler. I tiptoed up the stairs, then up the next flight of stairs to the upstairs of the house. The upstairs had a whole other living area, along with 3 bedrooms. I chose to hide in one of the unused bedrooms. I buried myself between 2 big beanbag chairs and a blanket. I left the door open to avoid any suspicions. I heard creaking coming into the room.
lively footsteps. Tyler was now moving around the carpeted room. I could hear him. He went over to the closet and opened it. Then he opened the second closet. Silence. Then he walked over to the other side of the room, and he started opening the drawers to the desk, rummaging through them. Suddenly I heard Tyler's young, innocent voice calling my name up the stairs in a kind of mockingly tone to try and scare me. My mouth opened and literally started twitching when I put two and two together. I lifted the blanket slightly over my head to see what he was doing, but it wasn't Tyler. I knew right away based off the person's height. It was a much taller, fully grown man. It wasn't Joe, and it wasn't his dad. He perked up like a statue when he heard Tyler's voice, and I saw him duck into the corner of the room, behind the small piece of wall that sticks out there. Tyler entered the room with his flashlight and kept saying my name over and over, slow and drawn out like. I was praying his light would not reach over to the corner of the room. His light landed on me under the blanket. He may not have even seen me, but I still willingly came out and acted all defeated, fake laughing and everything. I told him he won, put my arm around his back, and started nudging him out of the room. I kept the conversation as natural as possible, until we were halfway down the stairs. That's when I dropped the bomb and told him there was someone in there with me and nudged him to run outside. Being the scared 9-year-olds we were, all we could do was run next door and ask the woman living there to call the police for us. She did without hesitation. I still remember the scene vividly, of the cops pulling up, running into the house, and 5 minutes later ushering a guy out in cuffs. It was a great feeling, even as a 9-year-old. One time I had a sleepover with my friend Mike on a cloudy, dark night. There was a slight drizzle and occasional lightning. We were 13 years old. Mike lived on a dead end with one other house next to it. Across the street was a field surrounded by trees, and his backyard led to a forest. Mike and I were up late, much after his dad went to sleep. His dad's room was all the way upstairs. Mike's room was on the lower level of the house by the den, so the den was where we would hang out mostly to just play GameCube. A knock at the backyard window interrupted our game. The blind was shut, so we couldn't see outside. Mike ran to go open the blind. I told him not to, but he did anyway. As he did, I shut off the TV and lamps because I didn't want to be seen. Now that it was dark in the den and slightly brighter outside, we could slightly see outside and see that there was nothing but grass in the visible distance. A small flash of lightning confirmed that there was nothing but wet grass in all directions. We sat in the den with the lights off for a while, just waiting for something else to happen. We kept our eyes on the window, expecting somebody to come up to it. Eventually, after what felt like forever later, we turned the TV and lamp back on and pretended it didn't happen. The blinds were open this time, and every so often I'd take nervous glances at the window, just making sure nobody was out there. After getting so absorbed in the game and forgetting to take a glance at the window, there was the second set of knocks. Mike and I both jumped up and looked at each other. With all the lights on, we couldn't really see outside. At least, not until the flash of lightning outside, just for a brief moment, lit up the night sky, long enough to show the person who was standing at the window. This time we ran upstairs to Mike's dad's room and pulled him out of bed, screaming at him to get up. The three of us ran out to the backyard in our coats and shoes, turning the backyard light on the way, and also taking along flashlights. There was a buildup of mud next to the back wall of the house where the dirt patches were, and in the puddles of mud were heavy, distinct footprints of boots. We followed the footprints as far as we could, but as the mud faded away, so did the footprints. We searched high and low for anybody. We even went around front and then out into the woods. There was nobody. We all went to sleep, Mike and I in the den. I couldn't sleep though, I was terrified. Of course, the blinds were shut to the window and back door now. Just as I was anticipating it, there was a third set of knocks at exactly 12:15. I remember that number. Me and Mike both jumped from the couches and ran upstairs to his dad's room once again. This time he ran outside alone and told us to call the cops. He returned soaking wet, having found nobody. The cops came for nothing because there was really nothing they could do. The knocking didn't happen again though, and I also never slept over Mike's house again. Ever since that day, his den just always gave me the creeps. I used to be close friends with a kid named Chris. He moved away across the state when I was 8. Since we never got to see each other anymore, I got my mom to agree to drive me all the way over to Chris's new house in the country for a weekend sleepover. Pulling onto his property, I already knew this was the perfect place to do anything outdoorsy. It was a decent-sized house with nothing but woods in all directions. The first day we didn't do much because I got there late anyway, so we just talked for a while and watched a movie. A couple of times I'd think that I was hearing sounds coming from below the floor. I would ask him, "Do you have a basement? Is someone down there?" Chris went on to tell me that there was no basement, and that his whole family had been hearing weird noises coming from down there for a few days, and they planned on having some inspector over to check it out. The next day was partly cloudy and warm, so we planned on spending most of the day outside. I convinced him to go for a walk in the woods just to explore. After all, this was all kind of new to him as well. Conveniently, there was an opening into the woods that almost seemed to have meant to be a path. So as we were walking over to it, Chris's foot hit something that made a metallic kind of thud sound. His foot hit a rusty old cellar door. He said he didn't know about this, neither did his dad. He bent down and pulled it open, and it made an ear-piercing squeal as the rusty door turned on the hinges. It was the definition of pitch black down there, but it seemed a ladder led down a very narrow tunnel. Neither of us dared to step foot down there. Suddenly, a sound echoed up the tunnel, like the sound of something dropping onto a hard floor. And then metallic sounds echoing up the tunnel, getting closer. As soon as we realized it was the sound of somebody climbing up the ladder, we ran to get Chris's father, who was shocked to see what we had found. He called down there repeatedly for anybody to come out before calling a few of his buddies over to go down with him. Chris and I were forced to stay inside while the three of them went down there. They came back up 5 minutes later, all of them visibly shaken and nervous. They came back inside and talked to Chris's mom in private. They never let either of us in on what they saw. Apparently cops showed up as well, but we were forced to stay in Chris's room, so we couldn't watch any of it. In fact, it wasn't until I was 13 did Chris finally text me one day, telling me what his dad really found down there. 3 full body bags tucked away in a corner, an old cot, broken beer bottles everywhere, and the smell of freshly smoked pot. Chris told me that when we heard something down there, we probably heard whoever was living down there, and whoever was responsible for those dead bodies.
What I'm about to tell you is one of the last memories I can still remember from middle school, and not for a good reason. I'd argue that it was the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to me. When I was in middle school, I didn't have a lot of friends. The friends I did have were all a little odd, but then again, so was I. We spent a lot of time together and enjoyed a lot of the same things. There was Greg, Jay, Mark, and myself. We were inseparable. Back then, it seemed like the 4 of us would last forever. Looking back though, it was pretty clear that Jay and I were beginning to distance ourselves from Mark and Greg, but that's neither here nor there. One summer, Greg invited the 3 of us on a week-long trip to Maine. Greg's family had a summer home up in Maine on one of the little islands in Casco Bay. To be completely honest, his family was really secretive about the place, and none of us even knew it existed until he invited us there. His family was strange in general. But that's a story for another time. The drive was long and uncomfortable. I had a runny nose and was sneezing the entire time, which I could tell was really pissing off Greg's dad. He was one of those over-the-top germaphobes, and I got really uncomfortable anytime he'd look at me. Mark and I were also bickering about something stupid, but the two of us tended to get into that a lot. We had to drive the car onto a ferry in order to make it to the island. That part was actually really fun. The house was small but pretty. I remember feeling detached from reality in that house. I can't really explain it. It was like a whole other world on that island. I still feel like it would be easy for a person to get lost in that house, if that makes any sense. The island had a really dreamy feel. Everyone knew each other, and random people on the street would recognize and say hello to Greg when they saw him. We spent most of our time biking around, an activity that never got boring at our age. I'll skip the boring stuff. I don't remember all of it anyway. The second day of the trip, I couldn't find my Barcelona snapback cap anywhere. I was really upset since I was a huge soccer fan, and it was one of the only pieces of merch I had. Greg said he thought I left it on the beach, but I was almost certain I had brought it back. I remember crying to Greg's dad, who basically told me to get over it and not let something small ruin the trip, so that's what I did. The next day, after a long day of biking around, I realized one of my pens was missing. I had a pen collection at that time, which I brought everywhere. Like I said, weird kid. I couldn't remember whether or not I had taken that specific pen out of my case, but Jay said he remembered seeing me holding it on my bike. I was devastated. To me, losing a pen was the equivalent of losing a limb. That's how serious I was about them. I refused to cry again in front of Greg's dad, so I claimed I wasn't feeling well and opted to spend the rest of the evening in bed. I ended up falling asleep really early because of that, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised when I woke up at 3 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep. I was rolling around trying to fall back asleep when I picked up on something. I froze for a few seconds to confirm what I was hearing. Someone was whispering, almost inaudibly. I had to focus really hard to even hear it. Was I dreaming? There was no shot. I tried as best as possible to make out what they were saying, but couldn't understand a single word. It sounded like it was coming from Mark's bed, the top bunk across the room from me, but I couldn't be certain. I waited a few minutes, but the whispering continued. For some reason, I was scared to say anything or reveal that I was awake. Eventually, I blocked the whispering out of my mind and fell asleep. The next morning, I tried to forget about what had happened the night before. I debated asking my friends which of them had been doing it, but decided against it. We were playing some dumb game in the yard when Mark said he had to use the bathroom. He was gone a while, but that was typical for Mark. He took a lot of time to do everything. Eventually, I shot a glance back at the house and had to do a double take. In one of the second floor windows was Mark, staring blankly out at us. I figured he was in the bathroom, but that's when it hit me. Greg's house didn't have a second floor bathroom. I turned to see if either Greg or Jay noticed, but neither of them were looking. When I turned to look back at the house, Mark was gone. Greg's dad was planning on taking us to dinner that night, but I didn't want to go. I pretended to be sick again and told him I wanted to nap instead. He said that was fine and told me he'd bring me back something. As I was lying in bed, I realized there was no way I was going to fall asleep. I started thinking things over in my head. I just couldn't get over how weird it was that Mark was watching all of us from the house, and the whispering was even creepier. I'm not sure what compelled me to do it, but I got out of bed and started snooping around Mark's bunk. My jaw basically hit the floor when I found my Barcelona cap in his duffel bag. I dug around some more and found a bunch of my personal belongings that I didn't even know were missing. There was a nail clipper my mom had packed for me in there, along with my extra toothbrush, and, most disturbingly, a pair of my underwear. I didn't know what to think. I was about to cry when I noticed something else in the bag. His notebook. Sometimes, even to this day, I still regret picking up that notebook. My middle school brain was not prepared for what was in there. It was completely filled with drawings, pencil drawings, some sketched so aggressively that there were holes in some of the pages. There were drawings of monsters, creatures, and things out of nightmares. There were really disturbing acts of violence drawn in there. People getting run over by cars, stabbed, mutilated, tortured. It was sick. Worse than sick, it was demonic. There was honest-to-God demonic shit in there. There were drawings of me in there. The image that was never and will never leave my brain is a drawing of me on a cross with my legs missing. The last few pages were basically all of me, and one of the pages was just my name, scribbled 100 times. It makes me sick thinking about everything I saw in there, and there's stuff I haven't even mentioned. The last page was the worst. My name was at the top of the page in big letters, and below it were 4 words I'll never forget. I'll do it tomorrow. When everyone got back home, I got Greg's dad alone and told him about what was going on in a low voice while my friend started a movie in the living room. He didn't believe me until I showed him Mark's notebook, which I could tell he found equally disturbing. He didn't know what to do. He told me to put everything back the way I found it. I didn't want to, but he was the adult, and I couldn't tell him no. As I was putting the notebook back, I made a split-second decision and tore one of the pages out. Meanwhile, Greg's dad then ran out to the living room and told everyone there was a family emergency and that we had to end the trip early. As we were frantically packing our things, I could feel Mark's eyes burning a hole in my back. I was scared to look at him. We pulled out of the driveway, caught the first ferry off the island, and drove the whole way back without stopping once. Greg's dad dropped Mark off first, then James. James and Greg lived on the same street, so he let Greg out of the car with James. As we were driving to my house, Greg's dad told me that he'd talked to Mark's parents, and that it was best that I not mention anything to my parents. Greg and Mark's families were really close, so I guess that made sense. When I got home, though, I couldn't last 10 minutes. I broke down crying to my parents and told them everything. They were furious and called the police in the same minute. My parents were also outraged that Greg's dad would try to sweep something so serious under the rug. Things get a little fuzzy after that. I remember crying again while telling the police what happened. When they asked for proof, I was able to show them the page I ripped out of Mark's notebook. Apparently, that was enough. The police obtained a warrant and actually found the notebook. My items were all returned except for my pen, which the police were never able to find. My parents didn't tell me much about how things went, but I never saw Mark again. His family moved, and he never showed up to school again. I never hung out with Greg again either. The reason I'm writing this now is because last week, I received an anonymous letter in the mail. It said I remember everything, and wrapped inside the envelope was the pen Mark had stolen from me all those years ago. I have no idea how he found my address or why it's taken him so long to reach out. I'm honestly considering switching apartments. If anyone has any advice about my situation, I'd greatly appreciate it. This story is fresh in my mind since it literally happened last week as I'm writing this. My extended family is odd. I won't get into it, but basically everyone is either a gun nut, avid hunter, or both. Most families go on vacation in the summer. Mine tends to go around winter time. We don't go on typical vacations though. Every season, the adults chip in and rent a house for a week in some random location, usually in the woods. This time around it was a cabin in Vermont. I say cabin, but it was more like a castle. It had to be to accommodate all of us. Now comes the strange part. We play a lot of weird games as a family. Most of them involve shooting to some capacity. Here's the weirdest one. On the second to last night, all the adults gear up in warm clothing and venture outside into the woods for a massive game of laser tag. I know how ridiculous this sounds, believe me. I'm no stranger to people walking out of my life because of my family. The winner every year gets to claim a pretty decent prize pot and a ton of bragging rights. Plus, we played with this really cool industrial-grade set my uncle Lucian made. He was the most gung-ho about this whole thing. The rules were simple. It was every man for himself, and the last person tagged won. If there were multiple people left by midnight, the prize was split. Once you got tagged, you made your way to the fire pit outside the house. Once the second to last person made it back, everyone would fire rounds into the air to let the last person left know they had won. I had just turned 18, so this was literally my first time being allowed to play. I'd be lying if I told you I wasn't psyched to play, not even for the money, but just because it seemed fun. As we were about to make our way outside, Lucian made sure we all knew how the equipment worked and where to keep our markers so the game would be fair. Then he told all of us to set a 10-minute timer on our phones so we'd know when to begin. Then, without warning, he turned and sprinted into the woods, like he was running a track race. My relatives followed suit, spreading in all directions. I noticed that most of them had run uphill, so I figured going downhill would give me a better shot at lasting longer. It was dark, but the snow on the ground made things pretty visible. I can't remember how many of us were playing, but it was a lot. At least 10 of my cousins and a couple sets of parents, including mine. Our family's pretty huge. After venturing deep into the forest, I found a little perch where I could see decently far up the hill, so I figured I'd wait there and catch my breath. I sat there for a decent while, trying to think of what to do. I figured if I kept walking adjacent to the slope, I could eventually work my way upwards and maybe flank whoever was still up there, so that's what I did. I must have walked along the slope to the left for 15 minutes straight, putting as much distance between me and the house as possible. Time really wasn't an issue, as there were still about 2 hours until midnight. I started walking up the slope. Just then, I heard a very faint crunching sound over my left shoulder, in the direction facing opposite my uncle's house. I jumped behind the nearest tree, praying whoever it was couldn't get a clean shot off. After a few seconds, I looked in the direction of the sound, but didn't see anything. And then, after straining my eyes, I saw it. A very faint, almost unnoticeable trail of footprints way off in the distance. They led to a thick tree about 15 yards behind me. There was someone standing behind that tree. I was positive of it. And then it hit me. Why hadn't they just tagged me? I was clearly out in the open, oblivious to their presence, and they were clearly trying to sneak up on me. I started running up the hill, hoping to get out of range before they could get a shot off. I was just about to continue back to the right towards the house when I noticed something. Further off to the left was another set of footprints. This one was weird though. It started from deeper in the woods, came towards me, and looped back into the forest. Had someone been out flanking even me? They would have had to walk further into the woods than I had, which I found pretty hard to believe. Before I could keep thinking, I heard something from the slope I had just run up. It sounded like a person falling into the snow. I continued running, this time back toward the house. I pulled out my phone. It was past 11. I couldn't believe an hour had already gone by. I kept running and stumbled upon a path of footprints heading towards the house. They looked fresh, so I picked up the speed, hoping to catch someone off guard. I passed a line of trees and saw my cousin Corbo walking at a steady pace, laser gun in hand. I crouched and pulled out my pistol. I nailed his marker and it started blinking. He slammed his fist against a tree before shaking his head and continuing towards the house. I grinned, thrilled to have actually gotten a kill. High on the adrenaline, I decided to hatch a plan to get the jump on the person stalking me. I sprinted ahead for another minute, then doubled back until I could safely jump behind a tree without leaving an obvious trail. It was flawless. There was no way anyone following my footprints would know I was hiding there. As I was waiting there, my marker started blinking out of nowhere. I was pissed. The beam was coming from where I had just been. It was definitely whoever was stalking me. I stood up, expecting whoever had just shot me to turn their laser off. They didn't though. The beam stayed trained on me, which actually started to get on my nerves. It felt like they were taunting me. I wanted to know who had been behind me that whole time, so I started walking in the direction of the beam. They never stopped shining their laser at me, even as I began closing in. All I could see were their hands. The rest of their body was standing behind a tree. Just then, I heard a bunch of gunshots sound off behind me, making me jump. I froze. Impossible. I must have won. Corbo must have been the final kill. But then who in the world killed me? I kept staring at the thin beam of light that was still pointing at me, and then the person holding the laser gun stepped out from behind the tree. It was a stranger. Even worse, there were two of them, standing side by side. Just then, I heard a crunch from behind me. I whipped my head around to see a man in a ski mask holding a trash bag in one hand and a knife in the other. He noticed me staring at him and started sprinting toward me. I ran, ditching my gear and screaming at the top of my lungs. I could hear all three of them chasing me, yelling things that I didn't even think were English. I zipped past the trees and ran as fast as I could through the snow, praying to God I didn't trip. They were gaining on me. I didn't want to turn around, but I knew they were right on my heels. Finally, I could see the lights of the house in the distance. I kept screaming and running, feeling my legs starting to give out. I was so close to the clearing, and that's when I saw Lucian sprinting toward me, hunting rifle in hand. He aimed above my head and fired 3 shots into the air. I heard whoever was behind me trip before running back into the woods. I collapsed at Lucian's feet, desperate for air. I literally passed out from exhaustion right there in the snow. The next morning was rough. My aunt explained that she had tripped at one point during the game and later realized she had dropped her laser gun, which explained how the guys in the woods had one. Corbo had tagged 6 of my relatives before I found him, which is why he was so upset when I got him. It turned out that he was in fact the last kill. Lucian and my dad had run out into the woods with their guns, but couldn't find a thing. They tried following the footprints, but there were so many branching paths and dead ends they eventually gave up. That whole day was a blur. The adults contacted the owners of the house, and we also reported everything to the police. The next morning, I woke up to yelling coming from downstairs. Lucian was losing it, yelling toward the woods at the top of his lungs. I ran down to find a single snowman facing the house. In its hand was the laser gun my aunt had dropped. Lucian fired a few rounds into the snowman's head before shouting some more threats and storming inside. It's only been about a week, but I'll send an update if I hear anything. When I was in college, I couldn't afford the extravagant spring break vacations to Mexico that all the Greek-like people went on. Because of this, I spent my first 3 spring breaks on campus, which I actually didn't mind too much. By the time spring break rolled around my senior year, though, I realized that it was basically my last chance to get the spring break experience I'd been missing out on. Mexico was still out of the question since I'd still be paying everything myself. Eventually, my girlfriend Allie found a decently priced Airbnb that sounded pretty appealing. We figured we could turn it into a couple's getaway of sorts, so we invited her best friend Laya and her boyfriend Calvin. We were all super excited since we had never been on a vacation together before. The place we had picked wasn't your typical spring break Airbnb though. It was nestled in a really secluded woodsy area in Lake County, California. There was a hot tub, an exposed fireplace, an antique-style record player, and some cots for stargazing outside. It was honestly perfect. The place was about 2.5 hours away, so we'd get a nice and relaxing drive on the way. Unfortunately, Calvin drove a really cramped Mini Cooper, meaning the girls had to squeeze into the back seat. He was honestly pretty insecure about his car and would get annoyed when one of us would make a comment about it, which was a pretty funny detail. As terrible as that car was, it was a drop top, which was really nice. We pulled in around 8 p.m. after it was already fully dark out. I can't even lie, the place looked a little scary late at night with all the lights off. When I say it was in the woods, I mean it. The trees blocked the view of all but one of the neighboring houses. The first night was really chill. We hung by the fireplace with a bottle of wine and played some board games. We wanted to go in the hot tub, but Calvin was complaining, so we didn't. He was honestly being pretty pouty for some reason, but we all just assumed there was something on his mind. The next night was better. We convinced Calvin to join us in the hot tub for some drinking games. The hot tub was connected to the back of the house, but inside its own little room, the walls of which were just screens. We were playing Never Have I Ever with some music blasting, having a lot of fun. We were all more than a little buzzed at that point. And just then, though, a flash of bright light lit up the spa room. If it had been raining, we would have assumed it was lightning, that's how bright it was. I quickly turned the music off, and the 4 of us stared at each other, nervous to say anything. I quietly got out of the hot tub and made my way from the spa room to the back deck. I looked out into the woods, but it was too dark to see anything. Out of nowhere, I started hearing a clicking sound coming from the woods. A few seconds later, I heard another one from a different direction, and then a whistling sound started up. The sounds kept coming, clicking and whistling from too many directions to keep track of. I yelled for Calvin and the girls to run inside, and I followed them into the house. The 4 of us huddled in the living room, not sure of what to do. I thought maybe it was a dumb prank or someone messing with us, which is why we didn't call the police right away. A few minutes later, though, someone started banging on the front door. The girls were hysterical, so I told Calvin to call the police while I grabbed the biggest knife in the kitchen, ready to protect everyone should it come to that. I yelled in a deep voice that I had a gun, which was obviously just a bluff. The banging stopped. Calvin said the police were on the way, but out there in the middle of nowhere, they could have been miles from us. We waited in silence for a few minutes. It was the tensest moment of my life. Just when we thought the nightmare was over, one of the living room windows shattered. Someone had thrown a massive rock through it. The girls screamed, and I told everyone to run upstairs and lock the door. I stayed downstairs, bracing myself for a fight. By some miracle, no one came charging through the window. Eventually, I ran over to inspect the window and noticed there was a piece of paper taped to the rock that had been thrown. Scribbled in black ink were the words, "Go away, you shouldn't be here." The police arrived shortly after and did a thorough search of the property. They of course found nothing. We weren't sticking around to wait for them though. We were packed up and out of there that night. The Airbnb hosts actually ended up giving us a refund, although they refused to talk about the situation. My girlfriend thinks there's something the owner wasn't telling us. Maybe she's right. I guess that could explain why the place was so cheap. Either way, I don't think I'll be taking any vacations or using Airbnb anytime soon. This happened over the course of 3 or 4 years when I was a kid. I can't remember exactly when I got the first one, but I started having this recurring, half-lucid nightmare maybe once every couple of months. From what I can remember, here's how it would go. I'd be lying down in bed, only the view wasn't from my first-person perspective. Instead, I'd be looking down at myself from the ceiling, like I was viewing my own bedroom through a security camera feed. The out-of-body dissociation always freaked me out. I'd try to float or swim towards my body, but I was never able to move beyond swiveling my head to look around the room. I was half lucid, so I knew it was a dream, but that didn't make me any less scared. After calming myself down, I'd start noticing strange things about my bedroom. For one, the digital clock on my nightstand would always be counting in reverse. That was typically the first strange detail I'd notice. And once I noticed that, I'd start seeing other weird stuff. There were these drawings taped to random spots on the walls and dresser, like crayon drawings you'd expect from a kid my age, but I had no memory of ever making them. I wasn't the type of kid who ever drew much, so it wasn't like I had just forgotten about them. They always showed the same thing, a row of people holding hands, all smiling, with one smaller figure who I can only imagine was me. They were always standing in front of a house with a blue roof, but I can't remember much more about the drawings than that. The other detail about the dreams that still sticks out to me is an old toy train of mine that was always sitting in a different spot on my bedroom floor, which was significant because I had lost that particular toy years prior. Anyway, after analyzing my room for a bit, I'd get this unexplainable urge to look out my bedroom window. I'd glance over, and as if it were on cue, a man would appear just a few inches from the glass. He had short gray hair and what looked like a cut on his left temple. That's honestly all I can remember about his face. He would watch me sleep for a few seconds, then start clawing at the window like he was trying to open it from the outside. That's usually when I woke up. Sometimes I immediately ran to the window, and sometimes I was too terrified to even move. But I always ended up checking one way or another. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Maybe claw marks or a smudge from where his hand had been. But there was never anything there, or anyone for that matter. After the 4th time it happened, I finally told my parents. My mom told me that recurring dreams weren't that rare, especially at my age, and my dad chimed in to remind me that they were always just one room away if I ever felt scared. I nodded and acted like that helped, but it didn't. Not really. My dad could tell I was still scared, so he took me by the hand and explored the exterior of the house with me. There was no indication that anyone had been there. No footprints, no smudges on the window, nothing. Even so, that didn't calm my nerves as much as you might think. Keep in mind, this was about 1 year in, so I was having this dream roughly once every 3 months. It wasn't happening every night, not even close. But having the exact same dream 4 times definitely means something, which I knew even at that age. But after that 4th dream though, they just stopped. For a while at least. I went nearly 6 months without a single episode, and at some point, I let myself believe it was over. It all just kind of faded into the background, the way childhood fears tend to when life gets more normal. But then it came back. I have no idea what triggered it, But one random night, I had the dream again. Everything was exactly the same as I remembered. The clock, the drawings, the train, everything. But there was something different about that dream that was scaring me twice as much as the earlier ones had. I couldn't figure out what it was. Everything was following the exact same chain of events. But then, as I was looking around the room, I realized what it was. My bedroom window was open. As soon as I saw that, I woke up. There was a period of maybe 5 minutes where I couldn't move, complete and utter sleep paralysis. And it wasn't a passive sleep paralysis either. My brain was screaming at me to check the window the entire time, but I couldn't drag myself out of bed no matter how much I tried. On top of that, I felt significantly colder, as if cold air was blowing through my bedroom window, which I was convinced was wide open. Those 5 minutes were unlike any kind of fear I have ever experienced. All I could think about was how that man was moments away from climbing through my window, yet there was nothing I could do about it. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I forced myself over to the window, confirming that it was locked. I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I was too scared. I'm not sure how I was even able to function the following morning. Another couple of months went by, but I wasn't going to be fooled again. Every night before I went to bed, I thought long and hard about the dream in an attempt to brace myself for having it again. I'm not sure if this logic tracks, but I was hoping that keeping the dream on my brain would help me not get too scared should I have it again. To my surprise, that technique actually worked. The next time I had that dream, I wasn't even half as scared. I didn't even bother checking the window after waking up. By the time I had it again, I was barely scared at all. Still, something about it lingered. Not in a scary way, but enough to make me want to bring it up to my parents again. Maybe it was the way I explained it, or maybe it was because I was slightly older. But for whatever reason, they actually paid closer attention this time. I tried to provide as much detail as possible, something I hadn't done before. As I was getting to my description of the man, my parents' demeanor shifted. Not too dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Specifically, it was right as I was telling them about the cut on his forehead. Before I could even finish, my dad cut me off and asked if I was sure about the cut. I told him I was, and he looked over at my mom like there was some unspoken detail that I wasn't aware of. I asked my parents what was going on, and they assured me that everything was fine. Not wanting to upset them, I didn't inquire further. But from that point on, I started wondering if there was more to the story. As it would turn out, a few days after that conversation, my parents sat me down and came clean. It wasn't some dramatic reveal or anything. They just said there was something they wanted to tell me. My mom did most of the talking. Apparently, when I was really little, like too young to even remember, there was a man named Brian who used to watch me sometimes. They always referred to him as Uncle Brian, but he wasn't actually family, just a close friend of my dad's from college. I guess he was around a lot when I was a baby and a toddler, especially during the times when both my parents were working full-time. But something happened. My dad didn't give details, just said that there was a falling out between them, bad enough that they completely cut ties. He said he forbade Brian from ever coming near our family again, specifically from coming near me again. That was the end of it. I asked what caused the fallout, but they wouldn't tell me. They just repeated that it had nothing to do with me, and that I didn't need to worry. The only other thing they told me, and this is what gave me a sick feeling, was that Brian had a noticeable scar on his forehead from a car accident he'd been in years before I was born. They didn't connect the dots out loud, but they didn't have to. I was old enough to make the connection myself. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me a little longer. I could tell he wanted to say more, like he hadn't been totally satisfied with how the conversation went earlier. After a few moments of silence, he told me his theory. He said he thought the dreams were my brain's way of processing something buried really deep, some memory from when I was little, before I could even form full sentences. He mentioned how close I apparently used to be with Brian, how I'd cry when he left the house, how I always wanted him to be the one to read me to sleep. My dad said he couldn't think of any other way I'd know about the scar on Brian's forehead. I didn't know what to make of that. I had no recollection of this Brian person whatsoever. Even now, I still can't recall a single memory with him in it. I had no choice but to move on with my life, though, recurring dream or not. Another handful of months passed. I'm doing my best to describe the timeline as accurately as possible, but it's hard to remember exactly how much time passed in between each dream. That said, the frequency decreased after talking to my parents. I had the dream only once or maybe twice within the next year, but things took a very dark turn sometime in year 4. One night after waking up from the dream, I glanced over at my window, just out of habit, and this time, I actually saw something move. It was just a flicker, but I was 100% sure something had just moved from right outside my window, and just like that, all the fear I had spent years trying to prevent came rushing back. It was actually worse. I jumped out of bed and screamed for my parents, who took me very seriously. My dad sprinted outside in his bare feet while my mom held me tightly. Eventually, my dad came back and started whispering stuff to my mom. They told me to stay put while they called the police. I listened to them and stayed in their room, although I don't remember ever hearing any sirens or other voices besides theirs that night. My dad insisted everything was fine and that the police were going to take care of things. The next day, he confessed to me that he had seen what he thought were extremely faint footprints underneath my bedroom window. I asked him if he thought it was Brian, and he said that was impossible, since they had moved and Brian didn't know where we lived. My dad promised me that nothing bad was going to happen ever, and he would turn out to be right. I never had that dream again. My parents don't like talking about this incident, and I can see why. I'm still yet to get a straight answer out of them, but I've since stopped trying. What I can't wrap my head around is the sickening thought that every time I had that dream, there really was someone outside my window watching me. Was it really plausible that someone had been periodically stalking me for 4 years? It doesn't track, and I can't decide what's scarier. If it really was Brian watching me, or just some complete stranger that my brain associated with him for whatever reason. And who knows how that somehow got translated into my dreams. I've done research, and I still don't even know how that would be possible. Maybe he was making a noise or something, and my brain picked up on it. I really can't say. What I can say is that I'm 95% sure my parents never called the police that night. That's something I will likely never get an explanation for. I'll most likely never get any answers regarding this experience since it happened so long ago. But if I do, I'll send an update. I'm going to keep this as short as possible. Most nights I fall asleep to some form of sound. It's the best way I know how to knock out quickly. Sometimes it's a chess video, sometimes it's a podcast about space, sometimes it's just a recording of a thunderstorm. You get the idea. I'm a very active dreamer, so whatever I fall asleep to usually gets translated directly into my dreams in some form. For example, if I fall asleep to a soccer compilation, then it's likely I'll have a dream about playing soccer. Part of the reason this is so clutch is because I had a ton of nightmares growing up, and this technique prevents them. This happened a couple of weeks ago during a sleepover at my friend Duncan's place. It was a sleepover, so I had to fall asleep normally. That wasn't an issue for me. It just meant my dreams would be a lot less predictable. There were 3 of us, me, Duncan, and Ian. Duncan's parents were away for the weekend, which is why we were having the sleepover in the first place. He has a lot of big, comfy couches in his living room, so that's where we all slept. That night, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've had in a while. I was out at sea on a small sailboat. I don't even know where it came from. I've never been on a sailboat in my life. The water was super choppy, and I remember the sky being this weird mix of dark purple and gray. The wind was howling, but not in a scary way. It kind of felt like I was in a movie or something. Then the boat lurched. I couldn't see what we hit, but I definitely felt it. Whatever it was, it knocked the whole sail sideways and cracked something underneath. Water started gushing in through the bottom, and I remember trying to plug the hole with my jacket, which obviously wasn't doing anything. I started panicking, like full-on helpless panic, and just as the boat started to sink, a dolphin jumped out of the water, locked eyes with me, and said in perfect English, "Wake up." That instantly snapped me awake. I'm usually pretty groggy after waking up, but this was different, although I didn't know why yet. I looked around the room, trying to figure out if anything was different or strange, but everything looked normal. My friends were sleeping next to me, and the living room was exactly how we left it. You know that weird in-between phase right after you wake up where you can't really process information accurately? That's what I was experiencing. A few seconds later, though, my brain started functioning properly, and I picked up on a sound that was definitely out of place. There was this distinct rushing sound coming from somewhere upstairs. It wasn't muffled like you'd expect if a faucet was just dripping. It was consistent, like a hose or something. That must have been why I had that wonky dream about the ocean. I sat there for a second, trying to figure out what I was hearing. Then, like an idiot, I got up to check it out myself. I crept up the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible. The noise got louder with each step. It was definitely running water, and it was coming from the upstairs bathroom at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly cracked open, and even from a distance I could see the sink. One of the knobs was turned all the way to the right. The water was just gushing out, full blast. There was no way that could have happened on its own. It didn't even make sense. I got close to the doorway and was about to step in, but something made me stop. The bathroom up there is pretty big. It's got this long counter and a bathtub with a curtain, plus this awkward corner where the toilet is. Plenty of blind spots. For all I knew, someone could have been crouching behind the tub or standing right behind the door. My stomach dropped. I don't know why, but I just couldn't go in. I backed up and booked it down the stairs to wake up Duncan. I shook him hard and told him something was wrong. At first, he was groggy, but the urgency in my voice must have gotten through, because he sat up and asked what was going on. I told him the sink upstairs was blasting and I thought someone was in the house. That woke him up real fast. We left Ian asleep on the couch and crept back up together. When we got to the bathroom door, Duncan didn't even hesitate. He pushed it open and stepped inside. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. Almost immediately, a figure lunged from around the corner and tackled Duncan from the side. It happened so fast. All I saw was Duncan go down and this guy swinging a piece of PVC pipe like he was about to beat the crap out of him. I didn't think. I just threw myself at the guy, trying to get him off Duncan. We both piled on him and wrestled him to the floor, but he was bigger than both of us. It was pure chaos. Eventually, the guy broke free and bailed, shoving both of us to the side and sprinting for the stairs. By the time Duncan and I made it to the porch, he was gone. The police showed up maybe 30 minutes later, but they weren't much help. They determined that the entry point was a downstairs window, which was wide open and had been previously unlocked. Duncan's family doesn't have cameras in their house, so there was no evidence we could turn over. The police said that it was likely that it had just been a burglar committing a random attack, but my friends and I think it was way more specific than that. First of all, why would a burglar purposely make noise by turning on a sink faucet in the first place? Yeah, it was obviously a trap to lure someone upstairs, but what was the point if he was trying to rob the place? This makes me think he had a more sinister intention, one I can't fully explain. Duncan is convinced that whoever broke in knew his parents were out of town and had expected only one person to be there that night, him. If that's true, then I can only imagine that whoever had broken in intended on seriously injuring or killing Duncan. I don't even like to think about what would have happened had I gone in that upstairs bathroom by myself. This happened on a Friday night a couple months back. My girlfriend's parents had planned a weekend trip out of town, some kind of anniversary thing, I think. So naturally, my girlfriend Bonnie invited me to stay at her place. Normally, her parents are pretty strict, and sleeping over in her room is definitely off limits, but since they'd be gone the whole weekend, we figured it wouldn't hurt anyone. Bonnie lives in one of those suburban neighborhoods where every house looks the same, quiet enough that by 10 o'clock it always feels deserted. Honestly, that place creeps me out a little whenever I leave late at night, so I was relieved at the thought of just staying put for once. I showed up around 8, brought snacks, and we watched a movie. The usual stuff. Bonnie's room is on the second floor facing the backyard, and from her window, you can just barely see into the dense line of trees that borders their property. They don't have much exterior lighting, so at night it's pitch black out there, like looking straight into a void. Bonnie has a queen-size bed, so we both had plenty of space, enough that we could stretch comfortably without crowding each other. I'll skip the rest of the irrelevant stuff. We eventually turned off the TV around midnight and drifted off. I don't remember falling asleep, but I vividly remember the unsettling dream that followed. Now, before I tell you about it, I want to say one thing. I've only had a false awakening dream a couple of times in my life before. This night was one of them. For anyone who's never had one, it's a really strange and almost transcendent experience. Dreams like the one I'm about to describe are actually the main reason I believe there are things in this world beyond those that we can see. In the dream, I woke up abruptly to the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut somewhere downstairs. Before I could even process it, rapid footsteps started racing up the stairs. Without hesitation, I shot up in the bed with the intention of intercepting whoever had broken in, but something stopped me. Bonnie's room looked identical to how it had looked when we went to sleep. Every detail exactly as it should have been, except for one thing that I could still picture in my mind's eye even now. A thin yellow glow spilling into the bedroom from the crack beneath the bedroom door. It was just a sliver of light, but for some reason, I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. All my confidence was gone. My vision began tunneling into this little bar of light as everything else started fading to black. The footsteps made it up the stairs and started storming towards the door, but I couldn't do anything about it. I was frozen. And then, silence. I was still fixated on the light below the door when the voices started. At first, it was just one voice. A woman's voice, saying all sorts of nasty things about me. Insults about my appearance, my outlook on life, my future, but then things started getting more personal. It knew things about me, deeply personal things I'd never shared with anyone, not even Bonnie. It started reciting events from my past, things I had said, things I had done, things no stranger would know, things no stranger could know. One voice became two became three, and before I knew it, there were 100 voices tormenting me with my darkest, most repressed secrets. It genuinely felt like the darkest pieces of my brain were being dragged out of my head and thrown under a microscope. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw off the covers, bolted across the room, and swung open the bedroom door, ready to confront whoever was harassing me. But the instant the door opened, every light in the house snapped off, and I was plunged into pure darkness. The voices stopped, and the air turned ice cold, sharp enough to sting my skin, and for a split second, it felt like I'd stepped into another world entirely. I stumbled backwards in a disoriented haze until I found the bed, then scrambled under the covers like I was 6 years old again. And then, I woke up. Only, I was still dreaming at that point. I just didn't know it. I sat up slowly, obviously still scared, but trying to reassure myself that the nightmare was over. But to my horror, when I looked at the bedroom door, I saw that same beam of light pouring into the room. And then I heard it. The downstairs door slamming shut again, followed by those same frantic footsteps stomping up the stairs. The entire sequence replayed itself with agonizing precision. The footsteps stopping at the door, the voices, the secrets, the whole thing. I couldn't help myself. I again ran towards the door and threw it open, only to experience that same cold darkness as before. When I finally woke up for real, my heart was racing. I was 75% sure I had actually woken up, but I was so disoriented from the strangeness of that double false awakening dream that I couldn't be sure. Bonnie was sound asleep next to me, completely unaware of what I had just been through. That's when I knew I was awake for real. In my dream, I hadn't even thought to look over at the other side of the bed. I started to relax, but when I sat up to look at the bedroom door, I damn near screamed. There, under the door, was that same strip of light that I had seen in my dreams. It was the exact same image. It didn't make sense. Bonnie and I were alone, and every single light in the house was supposed to be off. For a second, I just stared, unsure of what to make of what I was seeing. But then I heard footsteps downstairs, clear as day. Someone was inside the house. Right away, I knew we were being robbed. Without another thought, I pulled out my phone and discreetly called the police. After telling them what was happening, I tiptoed over to the door just to make sure it was locked. Then, I crept back to Bonnie and gently woke her up, putting my hand over her mouth so she wouldn't accidentally make a noise. She didn't scream or anything when I told her, which was a huge relief. It felt like forever, but after a few tense minutes, the police arrived at the house. Things got loud downstairs. The police actually kicked in the front door, and there was a bunch of shouting. When I felt like it was safe to do so, I went downstairs just in time to see two masked men being ushered into a police car in cuffs. I talked to the officers for a bit and thanked them before going back upstairs. It was late, but Bonnie's parents rushed back from their trip early once they heard what had happened. They weren't even mad that I had stayed the night. After hearing my story, they were actually grateful. About a week after that, Bonnie called me with more information. The officers told her parents that the two men who had been arrested admitted to breaking in because they'd seen a Facebook post about their trip and didn't think anyone would be home. As odd as it sounds, thinking about the actual break-in doesn't bother me all that much. The reason I can't get this experience out of my head is because of that damn dream. I can accept that the noise of the break-ins made its way into my head somehow. That part's fine. But what I don't understand is the actual content of the dream. Bonnie thinks I have some unresolved demons lurking somewhere in my subconscious, but I don't like thinking about that possibility. And as for the door, I was lying down, so I wouldn't have been able to even see the door, let alone conjure up a perfect image of it in my head. I really don't know what to make of that, but that strip of light is something I see all the time. I can literally see it in my head now. I don't even have to be closing my eyes, which is even more troubling. It's not like it's obstructing my vision or anything, but it's always there in the back of my mind. I'm sure that image will go away eventually, but part of me is worried that it'll be seared into my head forever.
My name is Samantha. I'm 20 years old and I work at a Walmart by a small town called Jackson in Alabama. Since I don't go to school full time, my boss would oftentimes put me on an overnight shift, back when the store was open 24 hours a day. Given that it was a supercenter, there would still be a number of employees working. My shift this one particular night was 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was one of only a couple employees doing stock work. There was one or two employees at registers up front. Given that our store sits in the countryside of Alabama, we didn't really get much business at these insane hours of the night. However, it was a prime restocking period. I didn't personally know the other employees working that night, but it's not like we'd run into each other in the giant store anyway. I started my night folding pants in the men's department and generally tidying up. I kept headphones in at night because usually there would be no one to tell me to take them out. The customer came to the jeans section, and at that time it was around 11:30 p.m., so it wasn't really that weird. People would still come in and close shop till usually around midnight. The customer came up to me and asked me if we had any more of the specific pants he found in a different waist size. I apologized and told him only whatever was on the rack. He thanked me and walked away. I made accidental eye contact with him as soon as he stood by the rack putting the jeans back. It was kind of awkward. He walked away and I continued with my work. Some time passed and the store started to look like a ghost town. No one to be seen as far as the eye could see. I think it was like 1 a.m. I had made my way over to the appliances section. I was doing a lot of back and forth work with boxes from the back section where we kept all the items that were yet to go out. I brought a wagon full of boxes to one of the aisles and started stocking the shelves. Because the shelves were empty though, I was able to see someone through the next aisle over, and they were watching me. Well, only up until he noticed me notice him. Then he looked away. But his eyes looked really familiar. I stepped closer to get a better view, and I realized it was the same customer from like 2 hours earlier. How in the world could he still be in the store? Without making it obvious, I took the wagon with me and passed the next aisle over just to get a look and see if the man had any items in his hands. His hands were completely empty. No way could he be shopping for 2 hours and not pick up a single thing. Something wasn't right. I quickly finished up restocking the shelf with coffee machines and other appliances, then brought the empty wagon to the back area. I chilled out in there for a while because, quite frankly, I felt like that guy might have been following or watching me longer than I realized. I played on my phone for a little while in the employee lounge. Then when I figured it was time to get back to work, I decided I would do grocery work instead, just to be in a different part of the store. I went into the dairy cooler and filled a bunch of crates with dairy products like milk and yogurts. This took a lot of time to do because I had to check the dates on the products and such. Over the loud sound of the giant refrigerators keeping the cooler cold, I heard the door to the dairy cooler burst open. There was conveniently a gap in the boxes sitting on one of the pallets that allowed me to peek through it to the door of the cooler. And I shit you not, it was that same customer. I ran to cover under one of the shelves and pushed a big box full of eggs in front of me. I didn't have to worry about making noise because the refrigerators were so loud. For anyone wondering why I decided to hide, well, I already assumed this guy was hanging around the store watching me. Seeing him in the employees only section, never mind that, coming into the dairy cooler, seemingly something bad was definitely about to go down. I hid behind that box with my head down for the longest time, expecting to hear the doors to the cooler open and close eventually. After a while of hiding and not looking, I assumed maybe he left after looking for me. I lifted my head from my arms for the first time and looked up in front of the box and screamed. He was right there, smiling at me, standing over the box. But his smile vanished as soon as I started to scream. He tried putting his hand on my lips to muffle my scream, but I didn't allow that to go any further. I pushed the box of eggs over, right into him, and the eggs falling to the floor made him step back, looking down at his shoes. I ran right past him, but he didn't grab me, so I continued to run till I found another stock worker and told him to help me. The employee's name was Bob, I remember from his name tag. Suddenly, the man from the dairy cooler came up to the two of us and apologized, explaining that he was from corporate and was coming to make sure everything was running smoothly. He said he didn't need to scare me and was simply checking up on me in the dairy cooler to make sure I wasn't slacking off. This Bob guy seemed to believe it all, but then again, he didn't seem very smart at all. I asked the man why he put his hand on my mouth, and he said he was trying to avoid making a scene. Then, shockingly, he gave me the order to finish up the appliance section, and he disappeared. As he was speed walking away down the aisle, I called out, "What's your name?" And he called back, "Tom." And just like that, he was gone. The next day, I called one of the managers and asked if there was supposed to be a visit from corporate the night before, and if a creepy man named Tom sounded familiar. My manager, Margaret, said it sounded like complete bullshit. There was no record of anyone from corporate named Tom who was supposed to come visit, nor would anyone from corporate ever be in the store at 2 a.m. They then went ahead and checked the camera footage, and a police report was filed when they realized this was a random man, and the cameras proved this man had been stalking me between the aisles for the better part of the first few hours of my shift. I told Margaret I couldn't do night shifts anymore after that, and she understood. I still work there, but more so as a day stock person or cashier. What's one place you can go to and find the weirdest, freakiest creatures in our society? I swear I've never been to a single Walmart where I didn't see at least one eye-catchingly strange human being. Strange does not even cut it for what I'm about to tell you. It was the Thursday before Black Friday. My Walmart was open extra late. I was in there around 11 o'clock looking for a new laptop, and by chance I picked up off the shelf the last one that was being promoted for a really good Black Friday deal. As I grabbed it though, some big, revolting, dirty-looking guy comes up to me and insists he needs a laptop very badly. I nervously said I'm sorry, it's the last one, and he got angry at me and started making a bit of a scene. The man clearly wasn't normal, and my heart started racing simply because I don't get put on guard in these kinds of situations a lot. As others looked on at the commotion this big guy was making, I walked away with the laptop box quickly and went straight to a line. He kept yelling at me as I walked away. It was unbelievable. Some other customers on the line even tried to laugh with me and make me feel better, saying the guy was a nut. So, I get home. My family's all asleep already. I go outside to sit in the yard by the pool and set up my new laptop. Then the light on the side of the house turned on. The one that turns on due to movement. I went to check the side of the house to make sure no one was there. Would that thing go off once in a while? Yeah, but there's a small patch of woods right next to the house, so animals would often run on the property, triggering it. Either way, I'm kind of a big pussy, so I went inside, locked the door, and finished setting up my laptop in the living room. A car alarm suddenly started going off outside. I recognized it to be my Cadillac. I looked out the window to confirm this. I ran to get my keys upstairs, then tried pressing the panic button to turn off the alarm. It didn't work from the inside, so I stepped out to the porch and clicked it off. But then I noticed a car parked in front of our house that wasn't there earlier when I got home, and any cars parked in the street on our block was suspicious enough. We live in a closed-off community, and everyone has huge driveways. I stepped down from the stoop and realized there was someone sitting in that car. I went back inside and locked the door. I went to my mom's room and told her I think someone outside means us harm. My mom and dad have a complicated situation, so my dad doesn't always stay with us. It would have been a different story having my dad there to tell about this. My mom came downstairs with me, noticeably worried based on what I told her. My mom took a look through the peephole in the front door, then gasped and put her hands over her mouth. I looked through it as well, and felt ready to throw up when I saw a huge man standing on the other side of the door on our stoop. I whispered to my mom, I think that man followed me from Walmart. Suddenly the doorknob started to turn as the man tried opening the door. When it didn't work, he started pounding on the door. That's when my mom let out a gasp and cry, and my younger sister came out from her room, who also started to panic when becoming wise to the situation. The pounding stopped, and there was a silence for a while, other than my mom's voice on the phone with the police. A few minutes went by, my mom still on the line with 911 with police en route, and there was a loud bang and crash downstairs in the den. A window was shattered. My mom and sister both screamed and cried. I told them to run upstairs while I locked the door to the den. I waited down there, expecting an attempt at the door or a bang. Nothing. Surprisingly, I heard a police car briefly wail its siren outside my house. It was the quickest response time I'd ever heard of. I ran outside to lead them to the den where the broken glass was. There they found the huge, dirty, crazy-looking man hiding behind one of our couches. He was arrested at once and we pressed charges. All the while he was screaming profanities and threats at me, not helping his case. Both cops told me the guy seemed unstable and on some kind of drugs, but told us to get a good night's rest because he wouldn't be bothering us again. So while it may be fun to people watch at Walmart and laugh at some of the goofy things you see, realize you may also find some of the more dangerous people in our society in your local Walmart. Working the night shift at Walmart as a night stock person on the weekends was my second job when I was finishing up college. I needed to pay off my loans, so I had to make money however possible. I didn't deal with customers or anything. I would just sign for night deliveries, do warehouse work, and stock shelves in the store during after hours. The typical shift would usually be either 11 to 7 or 12 to 7. On July 9th, 2015, a Thursday night, I still have it locked into my brain. I was midway through my shift in the electronics department when I saw in the corner of my eye someone walk past the aisle I was working in. This wouldn't usually catch my attention if it weren't for the fact that there were only two other workers in the building with me that night, Alvin and Baco. They were both wearing the same staff shirts I was wearing. I would know because we all clocked in at the same time. The person I saw in the corner of my eye was wearing all black, so I naturally walked to the end of the aisle and did a little peep around the shelf. No one was there. I yelled both Alvin and Baco's names, so when they didn't answer, it made it even stranger. but regardless, I went back to work. I was holding in a pee for a while, and I told myself I'd go when I finished work in that aisle. Seconds later, there was a huge crash a few aisles down. It actually startled me. I ran over to see what it was, and a bicycle was somehow knocked off its hook. The hook was still fine and in place. It seemed like someone would have had to put effort into knocking this down. I hung it back up and started walking around the aisles, suspicious as hell. I got to the last aisle towards the back of the store, which was the paper and cleaning aisle. Then there was this freaky-ass sound that I could best describe as a laugh. It sounded like it came from literally the next aisle over. So once again, I did a short run back to that aisle and felt my heart drop when I saw a man dressed in all black, waiting by the end of the aisle with his back facing me, but his head turned so that all I saw was only half his face. Then he suddenly ran, not towards me, but down some other aisle. I heard his footsteps running around. I was faced with a choice of chasing after him or going to find my 2 co-workers, and I chose the latter. All the while, I heard these freakish laughing sounds and footsteps that I honestly felt like were circling me. I found Alvin in the women's department and told him to be on the lookout for someone who wasn't meant to be in the building dressed in all black. We didn't have walkie-talkies, so I asked him to tell Baco if he ran into him. I excused myself because I couldn't hold it any longer. I had to go to the bathroom. I ran to the employees-only bathroom, which was in the warehouse section. I put a nest of toilet paper on the seat in one of the stalls and sat down. And yes, I'm the kind of person to sit when I pee. The door to the bathroom opened and closed. Naturally, with 3 to 4 people in the building, I said, "Who is that?" And with no answer, I assumed the worst. I heard that horrific laughing again, and someone stepped into view from between the crack in the door. Looking right in, they stepped closer until the crack was completely covered, and all I saw of their face was an eye. Then the whispering began. Unintelligible whispering, but the echo from the bathroom just made it more unsettling. I just remembered I had Alvin's phone number saved on my phone, so I got it out and called him at once. I was very loud with what I was saying, telling Alvin to get to the bathroom at once and help me. I stayed on the line with him and watched as the man on the other side of the stall laughed one more time, then ran out of the bathroom. I told Alvin to hurry, and 20 to 30 seconds later, Alvin entered the bathroom. He said he didn't see anyone on his way there. We didn't have any security guys working when the store was closed, so we couldn't even go look at the cameras. I stayed by Alvin the rest of the night, helping in whatever sections he was working in, because safety in numbers. I texted my boss that night, and when I woke up at 3 p.m. the next day, I read his response. He said all the camera screens returned static footage from the night before. Nobody went and turned them off as far as he knew. I got chills reading his texts. He believed my story and assumed it was related to the cameras, but with no video proof of the breaking and entering or trespassing, I don't think there was anything he could do. It was all above my pay grade, though. That was the only night shift I've ever had where something truly unexplainable happened. I've been a trucker for varying companies for 10 years. 3 years ago, I was working for a warehouse company in Kansas doing shipments. I usually drove a semi, which is what I was behind the wheel of on February 2nd. It was a cold Monday, so the week was just starting and a lot of loads needed to be shipped, so I was trying to bang it all out quickly. I started driving at 3 p.m. and intended on getting to the destination that same night. I didn't want to have to pull off on the side of the road somewhere to sleep. I did around 5 above the speed limit after 12, which is fast for a semi. I was starting to feel very tired, but the destination was less than an hour away, and I figured I could do it. My eyes were getting dry, and it was starting to become a chore just to keep them wide open. I splashed some water on my hand and then rubbed it on my face. It helped a little bit in waking me up. My truck was the only vehicle on this road at this hour, so besides my headlights, the road was completely dark. I remember reaching to take a sip of my water and almost spitting it out when I saw a figure approaching fast up in the distance. I hit the brakes hard, and as the truck slowed down close to a halt, I could better distinguish the features of this person almost standing in the middle of the road. He seemed to be wearing all black, with some kind of black scarf wrapped around his neck, and he had an unnaturally long neck. I know it's a weird thing to pick up on, but it was almost freaky looking. His face itself, however, was a complete blur. I couldn't make out any features. As my truck slowed down and got closer to this mysterious man, I was about to roll down the window to ask if he needed a ride, but he just turned to his left and darted into the woods. I didn't take an extra second to stop and think about it. I just pressed on the gas pedal again and moved on. Regardless of how freaky it was, I was in a rush. In fact, it wasn't even until about 20 seconds after that my heart really started racing from taking in how strange it really was. Maybe 5 minutes later, I was able to get over it. But just like that, something else happened. As I was back to my cruising speed, I saw something run across the street in front of me. At first, it looked like a big animal, but as I got closer and it crossed into the woods, I realized it looked like another person. I didn't even tap on the brakes this time, I just kept going. I kept zooming down the road, maybe even stepping on the gas a little more just because I was starting to get freaked out and wanted to get there faster. Another few minutes went by with nothing happening. However, I was getting increasingly tired, and at times I was even swerving into the other lane a little bit. 40 minutes or so left in the drive, and I didn't know if I could make it anymore. I started looking around for good places to pull over and park for the night. There was eventually a little opening on the side of the road made of gravel. I guess it was meant to be just a little parking rest stop kind of thing. I pulled the semi into it, parked it, and leaned back and rested my eyes. I fell asleep for not even an hour, just to wake up out of nowhere to the darkness. I still don't know what woke me up, but as I looked outside through the windshield, something in my gut was telling me to turn on the headlights, and so I flicked the knob, and lights lit up the surrounding area in front of my truck. There was something in front of the truck, though. A man. That same man with the black scarf I'd seen earlier standing on the side of the road. Now I could see his face much clearer. He had a very wide smile, and his eyes were open as wide as possible, and he looked right at me through the windshield. I turned the truck on and pulled it out of that little clearing as fast as possible. I didn't know what to think. How could he have walked 10 miles from where I'd seen him last? I didn't stop again that night until I made it to my destination. From there, I fell asleep in the parking lot and woke up early the next morning. Now, the only logical explanation I could think of is that my mind was playing tricks on me, because I had been seeing strange things all night. I've never heard of a hallucination being so vivid and terrifying, though, and that's the part that still really confuses and scares me. Before getting an office job in the city, I was a UPS driver for 2 years. It was good money, and I enjoyed it for the most part. It had its moments, though. It was 2010. I'd been out of college for 2 years. I was working 11 to 7 on a Thursday. It was the dead of winter, so it was dark by like 5 o'clock. I wasn't exactly living in Palm Springs either. I was living in a small town in North Carolina. I don't want to call it ghetto or slummy, but it wasn't a very nice area at all. I did deliveries in that same town very often. The housing situation in this town was weird. Some blocks would have rows of houses and trailer homes spaced far away from each other, while other blocks were just completely desolate. This made for less deliveries altogether because the houses were so spaced out and far from each other that it took longer than, say, a regular suburban or urban community. Deliveries were always marked on the map so that I could take a more strategic route instead of just driving all over the place. After hours and hours of deliveries, all over a span of at least 3 different small towns, I started heading down one of those streets I'd mentioned just now. Spaced out trailer homes and small houses on one side, forest on the other side. It's a little past 6 p.m. and my shift is winding down with not too many deliveries left. There was one house on this block, and the package was to be signed for, meaning I couldn't just leave it on the stoop. I pulled up in front of the house, went to the back of the truck, and pulled out one of the biggest and heaviest boxes of the day. There were some kind of small metal pieces bumping around in the box, lots of them. I couldn't even try to take a guess at what could be inside. My job was just to lug the thing to the front door of the trailer home, and that's just what I did. There was no doorbell in this home, so I had to knock. There were no lights on in there though, and I didn't see a car out front, so I was hoping somebody was home. I knocked a few more times, then I saw the curtains to one of the windows move, and footsteps come to the door. Then there was a long pause, a suspicious and unnecessarily long pause before the door finally cracked open. Some older woman poked her head out all paranoid-like, and when I said she had a package to sign, she opened the door fully. She seemed fidgety as I asked her to sign the device. She did so. It was a sloppy signature, too. She told me I'd need to help her carry the box into her room. I figured that would be the case. The moment I stepped into the trailer home, I got a huge whiff of some kind of stench. You know how every home has a distinct smell, whether it be good or bad. Well, this home smelled awful. I don't know what it was. She was leading me to a back section behind the tiny living room space. She took me to a narrow hallway where I struggled to carry the box, and then brought me to a door. She opened the door and told me to maneuver the box into the closet in the back of the room. I asked her to flick on the light. She said the light didn't work. It was next to pitch black in there, with the only source of light being the lamp from the living room seeping down the hall into this room. I could see just the slightest amount to navigate the box inside of the room. As I got close to the closet, I saw someone standing in the corner of the closet. I knew for certain it was a person because of the shape of the outline, and there was movement. There was no logical explanation to this. This person was clearly hiding from me, waiting. I left the box where it was and walked past the woman and said, "Have a nice day." She started to scream at me to come back and help her. Then she went as far as to call me a piece of shit. I didn't know what this woman and whoever was in that closet were planning on doing, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. I went on with my shift and went home that night, and thus began my job hunt for a newer, better job. I've been a truck driver since I was 25, and I've done a lot of night drives and of course had my fair share of odd experiences. I did deliveries for a number of different types of companies. Often I'd have to drive across state to make shipments to the receiving companies or stores. One day I had to drive literally from one side of California to the other to deliver a trailer full of wooden furniture items. Much of the drive was through open desert roads. It was going to be many hours, and I already had a late start to the day, so I knew a majority of my drive would be in the dark. Given the nature of these desert roads at night, how straight they are and how little traffic there is, it meant I could push the truck a little faster than I would on other roads. This meant that when I saw the flashing rear lights of a car in the horizon, I had to hit the brakes a little extra hard to bring the truck to a stop when I finally pulled up behind the car. It was an old Chevy Impala parked on the side of the road in the desert dirt. It had its hazards on. I got out of my truck because of course I had to be a good Samaritan and check if they needed help. I walked over to the car and tapped on the window, only to get no kind of response. I bent down a little to look into the car through the tinted window. There didn't seem to be anyone sitting inside. I did the same thing for all 3 other seats, and could confirm there wasn't anyone in the car. So I looked out into the cool, dark desert that the road ran through, though I couldn't see any further than maybe 20 yards in front of me. I was feeling especially hopeful this night for some reason, so I went back to my truck and got a flashlight from the toolbox that sat underneath the passenger seat. It was a heavy-duty tactical flashlight that was so bright it would hurt your eyes to look directly at it. As soon as I turned it on, it revealed what appeared to be an abandoned gas station on the side of the road. Apparently I hadn't noticed it before. I guess the reason I didn't realize it before was because the whole fill-up or parking area was basically dirt. There wasn't any concrete. There were also only 2 gas pumps. Behind them was a small building, probably an old quick-stop store at one point. It would make the most sense that whoever's car was over there would be in that building. I went to the front door, which was permanently jammed open, and the flashlight lit up a decent portion of the room inside. It was what I thought, a big convenience store you'd find at many gas stations, or at least it used to be. It was no wonder it didn't last on a road like this, though. I called out to let anybody know of my presence, and that I was there to help. There was the slightest bit of echo in the room, which gave me chills for some reason. Then I heard something, probably a shoe, scrape against the floor on the opposite side of the room, behind a few shelves that were probably once filled with snack items and drinks. I called out once again, offering my help if it was needed. Then I heard a deep, heavy whisper saying, "Get out." I understood what was said immediately, but I didn't understand why whoever said it would say that. I was also hearing heavy breathing in one corner of the room. It was enough to make me get the hell out of there in a hurry. On my walk back to my truck, this is what I heard. And there had to be at least 5 seconds of confusion. I didn't know if what I was hearing was real or not, if that even makes sense. I ran to my truck and called 911 because, to be honest, I was too scared to go back in that building. They asked for an exact location and I couldn't tell them. All I could say was that I was by an abandoned gas station on some road in the desert. They asked me to stay on the line so I could describe my location better. But suddenly, the car in front of me turned on and started speeding down the desert road. I didn't even notice him get into his car. It was so dark and I was so distracted by the phone call. I ran back into the building to see if anybody was still in there, while of course keeping 911 on the line. I went to the back section where I'd heard the voice and breathing, and I was mortified to see a fresh pool of blood on the floor. I could only imagine what had happened. I explained into the phone that I believed I'd just stumbled into a crime scene. Eventually they were able to send a bunch of state troopers to the scene. They asked me for any information I could give, license plate number, what the suspect looked like, what I thought happened. All I said was it was a black Chevy Impala, early 2000s, and I heard a man tell me to get out before hearing a woman screaming as I left the building. There was no body left behind, but I had a few ideas of what might have happened. I'm sure the state police took some blood samples and whatnot, but I wasn't able to be of much more assistance. Shamefully, I did not have a dash cam at that point to get the license plate number, but literally the next week I installed the dash cam into my assigned truck. This was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences that will always haunt me. My wife and I got married in the Church of the Little Flower in Coral Gables, Florida in 2017. We invited all of our close friends and family, including the family that neither of us really liked, because that's just what you're supposed to do. My wife Allie has this estranged aunt Chelsea that no one in her family is really close with. She used to have serious drug problems. It spiraled her down a path that just led to a rift between her and the rest of the family. Well, Aunt Chelsea was invited to the wedding, and when she showed up, she surprisingly came with a date, but unsurprisingly, he didn't look like the kind of guy you want to bring home to mom and dad. Right from the first time I laid eyes on him, I knew he was different, not in a pleasant, quirky way. After the wedding ceremony, of course, came picture time. The 6 bridesmaids, 6 groomsmen, and my wife and I all went to this nice backyard section of the church campus to have pictures taken by the hired photographer. Some close family from both sides came along as well to watch while most others went to the party hall. Aunt Chelsea and her date came to watch us take pictures as well. This was when I first got his name, Rob. The two of them were making everyone uncomfortable, like everyone in the bridal party would joke around and we'd genuinely laugh. Then either Chelsea or Rob would yell out these weird, inappropriate things. They just kept doing it to the point where they created awkward silences. And all of us were just internally cringing, dreading what weird things they'd say next. It got very awkward very quickly, let's just say that, to the point I wanted them to leave altogether. Anyway, we eventually finished with pictures. Then we migrated to Comber Hall, the party hall connected to the church, where food and drinks were being served. Being the groom, all the attention is on you at all times. You barely have a chance to sit down and gather your thoughts or even eat. Every second I had someone else coming up to congratulate me. And eventually, that person was Rob. He shook my hand again, his breath terrible, and his arms scarred up. He wasn't wearing a long-sleeved shirt, rather a stained gray polo. He seemed like a filthy person all around. He started talking to me with this loud, almost demeaning tone. I did my best to just be polite, and eventually he walked back to Chelsea. This was the last time I saw him that day.
Eventually, I saw Chelsea sitting by herself at the table, so I asked Allie where that Rob guy went. She had no idea either. After a while of Chelsea sitting by herself, Allie went up to her to ask her where her date was. Chelsea didn't know. She hadn't seen him in an hour. Chelsea also explained that they met in rehab, and that she had only gone out with him 4 times. Allie grew concerned with this man being here after hearing this. We asked our parents and some close family to look around for the man, to confirm if he was still there or not. There was some concerning news when one of my relatives said that some of the gifts in the room where the gifts were being stored were missing. We immediately attributed this to Rob, and had an employee ask over the microphone for everybody to keep an eye out for Rob. Chelsea wanted to call his cell, but she couldn't find her phone. This put a slight damper on things, but we didn't let it ruin our wedding day. Our parents called the police and dealt with them on the side, with the help of Chelsea giving information about Rob. After the wedding reception, a few close friends came back to our hotel room for a little after-party of sorts. Chelsea had texted Allie asking for our home address, because she had to drop off her gift that she forgot to give. Allie responded, and then our good time was interrupted by a distressing phone call from Chelsea's phone number. Allie turned off the music and put it on speakerphone. There was a male's breathing on the other end, like horror movie shit, like he was trying to creep us out. Allie kept asking where Chelsea was, to no avail. Eventually the person on the other end hung up. Allie called her grandma, who was the only one close enough with Chelsea to know where she would be, and she confirmed that Chelsea was staying with her for the night. Chelsea got on the phone and said she lost her phone at the wedding, and she didn't know her Apple ID or password, therefore she couldn't even track it with Find My iPhone. Our best guess was that it was that Rob guy. We were now concerned that he knew our address and that we weren't home. We were too drunk to go home, so we asked my dad to stay there for the night and watch the house. He gladly did so. And the next morning, we woke up to texts and missed calls from my dad. He said someone kept tapping on different windows to the house, as if to be messing with him. He called the police, but they didn't find anyone. That same day, we went to the police station to see what could be done about pursuing Rob, who we suspected was the one behind all of this. But without video cameras catching the thief in Comber Hall, and given that Chelsea's phone had been turned off or destroyed, there was little to nothing the police could do. Chelsea told us that she and Rob had gotten into a verbal argument, and that he blamed us for whatever she was saying. He thought we didn't like him, and in his words, we sabotaged him. This just further led us to believe he was responsible for that weird phone call and coming to our house in an attempt to scare or harass us. We never saw or heard from that Rob guy again, and we have only started to further distance ourselves from Chelsea after that. I had a pretty low-key beach wedding, mostly just family and friends. My wife, who I'll just call Trisha, invited more people than me for sure. She even invited her ex-boyfriend Kyle. I didn't know exactly how I felt about that at the time, but I acted accepting and fine with it because I knew they remained close friends. There were about 75 people at the wedding ceremony, including Kyle. I didn't pay it much mind the day of the wedding because it was such a big day and my mind was obviously racing. Kyle was friendly to me, but throughout the wedding reception, I noticed Kyle would constantly be talking to Trisha, and when he wasn't talking to her, he'd be looking in her general direction. I mean, Trisha and I were married now. It's not like he had any shot at all. So at the time, I started to think maybe I was just being a little too paranoid, even if it was slightly annoying. Kyle came alone to the wedding though, which I thought was just a tad weird that he didn't bring a date. My wife and I stayed in a fancy waterfront hotel that night, and the next day we went back home. A couple people who didn't make the wedding came by the house to congratulate us and drop off gifts. Surprisingly, Kyle stopped by as well. Trisha and I had recently moved into a new house together, and Kyle claimed to have stopped by to check out our new place and to drop off his gift that he didn't get to give us yesterday. He handed us, well, Trisha specifically, an envelope and a little foot-long teddy bear holding a heart. On the heart was our initials, which I actually found to be a nice, thoughtful gift. We gave Kyle a tour of the house and he stayed for a beer, but after that he said he'd better get going and congratulated us once more before leaving. Inside the envelope was a card containing $100. As nice as I thought the gifts were, I still believed he had some serious feelings for Trisha, and I asked her to ease back on the friendship a bit. She couldn't see what I saw though, apparently.
She swore up and down that they were just very close friends and that there were no feelings left on either side. Trisha put the teddy bear next to some of the other gifts on our dressers. While my wife and I were in bed together having a romantic moment, I stopped her when I heard this weird noise. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but it sounded like a small electrical component. I looked around for my phone and found it was on my nightstand. I chalked it up to being a vibration from a text notification. Like half an hour later, laying in bed with the light off, I once again brought up Kyle, asking if he'd texted her since the day before. She said he has, and I got a little annoyed. I repeated myself, saying I don't want her talking to him anymore. She got a little mad at me for accusing her of being interested in him at all. I assured her he was still interested in her. Why else would he stick around in his ex's life like this? She got back at me with her assurance that she doesn't view him romantically at all, that she's no longer attracted to him, and that she broke up with him for a reason. She followed this with she will ease back on her contact with him. I apologized for coming at her like that, and we went to sleep. The next day, when I got home from work, Trisha exclaimed that Kyle randomly blocked her on Instagram, and when she texted him asking what's wrong, he replied, "What do you care? I heard the things you said." When she tried texting back asking what he was talking about, she saw that he blocked her number now too. I wondered if maybe she butt-dialed him on her phone while we had that conversation the previous night. But when she checked her call history, his name wasn't there. I wasn't angry though. Him blocking her meant I was right. He did still have feelings, and now he'd be gone. That night while in bed, we talked about it some more. Then I heard the little electronic vibrating sound again. I looked at the teddy bear on the dresser. Then I got up and went to pick it up, and my heart dropped. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and started to tear the bear open. Trisha realized it immediately too. The inside of the bear's head was a square electrical component wired to what was very obviously a camera behind the left eye, and a microphone box wired to the left ear. This was connected to some kind of Bluetooth device that would probably allow a phone to send and receive data. We went to the police that night with the teddy bear and filed a police report. We then hired a lawyer and pressed charges against Kyle for invasion of privacy, and the judge ruled in our favor and required Kyle to pay us $15,000 each. Trisha also got a restraining order against him, and that was the end of him in our lives. Though we still do sometimes worry that he may pay us an unexpected visit. If he was crazy enough to wire a teddy bear to spy on us and possibly watch us in bed together, who knows how far someone like that is capable of going. I live in a safe town, the kind of town that you can leave your car doors unlocked. Hell, you can usually get away with leaving the doors to your house unlocked. The crime rate is very low, and I live in a dead-end block. I had just gotten home from work around 8 p.m. after a 12-hour shift and was preparing a late dinner when the phone rang. The second I picked up, I heard the sound of the person on the other end hanging up. I don't know if this has any correlation with what's to come, but if it does, that's even more horrifying. On nights where I get home late, especially after 12-hour shifts, usually I'll just cook, eat, clean up, take a shower, then lay in bed watching TV for an hour before going to sleep. This was one of those nights. I was physically and mentally exhausted, which led me to making what I learned that night was a serious mistake. I was laying in bed watching The Sopranos for my third run. Sometimes I'll drift off to sleep with the TV still on when I'm just completely beat, and that's exactly what happened this night. I woke up to the TV still playing The Sopranos. I had slept through 2 episodes. I felt around the bed for the remote and turned it off. In the now freshly silent room, I was able to hear little creaks in the wood under the carpet. I felt adrenaline kick in as I looked across the dark room, and I felt I could vaguely see the shape of a very wide figure. As I aimed the remote at the TV to turn it back on to light up the room, before the TV was even on, I started choking on my own spit as I tried to say, "Please leave." The TV came back on, and the room lit up a tint of blue, revealing her. This woman in a wedding dress, looking at me, with the veil covering her face. I tried to scream at first, but nothing came out of my mouth because I was just in pure shock. I sat up, pressed against the headboard of my bed, frozen. That's the best way I can describe what I was doing in that moment. The woman in the dress, whose face I could barely see, walked over to the bed, whispering, "Where's my groom?" over and over. but each time she said it, she got louder. Her whisper quickly turned to a yell, and she grabbed the edge of my mattress and started shaking it. I screamed back at her to leave me alone. Then I got off the bed, pushed her, and ran to the bathroom across the hall and locked the door. She followed me, trying to open the door, banging on it and repeating the words, "Where's my groom?" I yelled at her I'm calling the cops, and luckily I had my cell phone on me. The woman was crying now on the other side of the door, still knocking and banging. The last thing I heard her say was, "I have to get to my wedding." I heard her stomp down my stairs, screaming and crying. Then I heard the front door slam shut. I was on the phone with 911, and I explained what just happened. I checked the living room, and she was gone. I stepped outside to see if I could see which way she ran, but she was out of sight. A police officer showed up shortly, and I described her as some larger woman in a white wedding dress and veil. How she was screaming, "Where's my groom?" and "I have to get to my wedding." I couldn't help with the direction she ran to. It was either down the only direction the street goes, or the woods to the right. Because of my exhaustion after my 12-hour shift, I had forgotten to simply lock my door, something I honestly never even thought was a problem in my neighborhood. But this just goes to show that even the best of neighborhoods, you're not always safe from crazy people out there. I think this woman was off her rocker and belonged in a mental asylum. And I hope police or somebody found her roaming the streets that night and brought her somewhere to get her help.